Hello and welcome to Tech Skills Day 2021. My name is Cassidy Williams and I'm a Principal Developer Experience Engineer at Netlify, and I am so excited to be here with you today. This has been a tough year, but a lot of the good parts of this year has been the result of tech skills. And a lot of you have been reaching out and talking about how you've had to do a lot of things that you haven't had to do before. I'm looking at you IT pros and device managers. It's a tough job. Today is about celebrating you, your successes, your challenges, all of the things that you've had to deal with. And we're going to be spending today chatting with some incredible guests that I'm so excited to talk to. I hope you'll join the conversation on social media using hashtag TechSkillsDay. Hopefully you've already checked out the coding challenges and other activities for the month over at techskillsday.com. And if you like free stuff, you can still sign up for access to Pluralsight skills at the end of April at the link below. I could not be more excited to introduce our first guest. He read so many of our first favorite reads ever on the Emmy-winning PBS educational series Reading Rainbow, and he inspired our inner Trekkie as Lieutenant Commander Geordi LaForge on Star Trek: The Next Generation. Whether you were inspired by his performance on Roots or his podcast LeVar Reads, I'm sure we're all excited to hear from LeVar Burton. I got to sit down with LeVar to talk about storytelling, creativity, and more. But you don't have to take my word for it. Let's go. Hello, everybody, and welcome. I am so excited and geeking out to be able to be speaking with LeVar Burton today. Hi, LeVar. How are you today?
I'm pretty well, Cassidy. How about yourself?
Oh, I am great and very excited to be here. For those who don't know, which would be surprising, but you never know, LeVar is an actor, director, producer. He's the owner of LeVar Burton Entertainment. I think he's in the running to be the next host of Jeopardy. I don't know if that's real, but I want it to be. And it is just so exciting to be able to talk with you after being a member of a Reading Rainbow household for so many years.
I love that about you, Cassidy. Are you still reading today?
All the time.
All the time. All right. Any favorites that you want to share with us?
Oh, you know, I've been on a sci-fi kick lately.
That's my favorite genre.
It's so great. I usually kind of hover between sci-fi and fantasy, and then I sometimes go into some nonfiction. But right now I'm on my sci-fi kick.
Awesome. Have you read any Octavia Butler?
Yes.
Yay. All right.
So good.
Yes. Okay. All right. So what do you want to talk about?
We're on a good roll already. So I do want to talk to you about not just reading, but just stories in general, because you call yourself a storyteller, and at the start of your career till now, technology has really changed the way that we tell stories in a lot of different ways. In your opinion, what has changed the most? What parts of stories have stayed the same?
There's a lot about stories and storytelling that has remained the same, and you're absolutely right. There is a lot that has changed. I think that the part that is different than it has always been is the democratization of content creation. What I mean by that is that there's the barrier to entry is so low these days for anyone who has a story, and I believe that everyone has a story to tell. And if you've got a phone, right, then you have within your hand the right tool for the job to tell a cohesive story with a beginning, a middle, and an end, with characters that are compelling, those elements that have always been a part of good storytelling. And you have an opportunity to find an audience because the distribution is there as well. So we have never in the history of humankind been at a point when the tools of storytelling, professional grade storytelling, were so accessible to so many. And of course, the rules of storytelling, those elements of storytelling that remain constant, those are always good to include in your stories: the beginning, the middle, and the end, the compelling characters, right? You always want that to be a part of whatever story you're telling.
Yeah, absolutely. And you've spent a lot of time in your career encouraging others to shape their own story by tapping into their imaginations, and your efforts with Reading Rainbow, with the role you played on Star Trek, and more. Why is that important to you?
I think that our imaginations, I think of them as this superpower that human beings possess. Okay, because everything that you can think of began originally as a thought in the mind of some person, somebody, right? I think about Star Trek a lot in this conversation, because I know that there was some kid who grew up watching the original series like I did, and that kid saw all of those scenes of Kirk reaching to that Velcroed place on his hip, because there are no pockets in the future. I can tell you
Of
that
course.
because I've been there. I know. And so Kirk pulls out the communicator, he flips it open, he calls the ship, Scotty, can you beam me up? Right? That kid became a scientist, maybe an engineer, and designed a product that is more prevalent on the planet than the toaster, right? The flip cell phone was envisioned first as a futuristic device on a television show in the 60s and early 70s. And then years later, those thoughts, that imagined product made its way through a production, development, design, and production process that put that device in the hands of people. That's the power of imagination.
Yeah. Oh, it's so empowering to hear you say that. And there's a sentence that you said once: "Our imagination is a trigger for manifestation," and I love that, because it's so true.
Yeah.
The fact that we have the ability now to think of something and make it reality, it's empowering. And there's so many things where technologists specifically have the ability to just code it up, to build it and to run with it.
It's a remarkable time to be alive. I mean, the 3D printers, okay?
Yeah.
I mean, the list goes on and on. I know that there are people working on a way of maximizing the computing power of a chip. I think they call it geosynchronous systems architecture. And with this technology, with a few more iterations and generations of the technology, we will get very close to the holodeck in our lifetime.
Oh, how cool will that be?
How cool. Now, of course, I want to beam everywhere.
Yes.
Or anywhere. Really?
That's right.
And that's the one, that's the holy grail. And that one is that, I believe, will take, well, I doubt that I'll be around when that comes, but it's coming. I mean, we're gonna figure it out. That's the ingenuity of the human mind.
Yeah, it reminds me of just virtual reality stuff. Like that's the closest I've gotten to being able to go anywhere. You could be in a virtual reality headset and suddenly you're in Spain, or suddenly you're anywhere in the world, even on Mars.
Virtual reality, augmented reality, all of these things, the sophistication of AI, of artificial intelligence, all of these things are going to contribute to that technology being built and enjoyed by the consumer.
Yeah, it's so exciting, and it's so great. Well, I want to keep moving on because I have so many questions I would love to ask you. But you're all about authenticity, and sometimes it's kind of hard to stay authentic as you're kind of going through the daily grind of getting work done and stuff. But to you, why is authenticity so important today? And what advice do you have for others who are struggling to find or share their voice?
Wow. I don't think anybody's ever asked me that question before. Why is authenticity important to me? Well, I can tell you this. I have spent an awful lot of time, effort, and energy in my life trying to determine who I was or who I am. Mm-hmm. And having made great inroads in that area, I'm loath to give it up to anyone for any reason. I mean, and it's not that I think that you have to have an authentic voice to be a storyteller. I think it's essential, because they say to writers, write what you know, right?
Yeah.
Write what you know. And if you have spent the time working on yourself, really engaging in a process of rigorous introspection, right? And have really decided that whatever you see that you want to adjust or that it's not really necessarily a good look, and getting to the root of why it is we do the things that we do, and developing tools that help us avoid those kinds of patterns in our lives. If you have done that kind of work, then you know who you are. At least you're well on your way to figuring that piece of why we're here out. And if you have done that kind of work, then I'm certain you have an interesting story to tell, because what does a good story have? It has drama, right? It has conflict, and those times in our lives that aren't smooth, those bumps in the road, those moments of conflict, that's where we learn the most about ourselves, right?
Yeah.
So it's not just important, it's essential to have some self-knowledge as a part of your quiver of arrows as a storyteller.
Yeah, the way you said that, it reminds me of a joke, actually, that a friend of mine often say. We always say whenever we're struggling at work, whenever we're struggling through some downtimes, we think, this might be an excellent conference talk someday. This could be a really good story we can tell to a group of people someday. And it's true, because those kinds of things really are such a good learning experience.
Mm-hmm.
And it's something where you can be like, if I can get through it, you can get through it too. And it's so encouraging to so many other people then.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Because we all do it. We all struggle at some time or another. We all go through changes. We all get confused. We all lose our way, right? So there's no shame in any of it, because it's all a part of your story, right?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And being a part of stories and just trying to make people's voices heard is so important, and trying to be inclusive in every single way. What can we as technologists and leaders and leaders in technology do to create a more inclusive world, a more educated world, a more imaginative world?
I think as a society, we've been having this conversation with one another a lot since this past summer.
Yeah.
And I think where I am right now is the need and necessity to, when I'm asked this question or questions like this, to remind folks how important it is to listen to those who have been marginalized, to those who have been oppressed. More than anything, I think that we all want to be seen. We all want to be validated that we are here and that we matter to someone, and that our intrinsic value as a human being is seen or appreciated. And I believe that that's something that we all have in common. And for those who have not been seen or heard or allowed to breathe, it is important to just bear witness to the story. Give them an opportunity to be seen. And I was having a conversation with a friend of mine today, and he told me a story about how his brother, who was in trouble and out of trouble with the law, when he got out of jail, his brother, he was always afraid, because his brother always used his name, right? When he was stopped, he would say, "My name is," and he would use his brother's name. And so my friend was always, whenever his brother was out of jail, he was always afraid of getting picked up, because he knew that's what was going to happen. He was going to get stopped and he was going to go to jail. And it dawned on me, I said to him, you really do have the experience of what it is being a Black man in America, because it's the constant fear. It's always there. You live with it constantly, right? And so it's not the incidents necessarily that of being stopped by the police, although they can be deadly, and we have seen that clearly. But it's the constant worrying about it, and the need to be mindful that you might encounter someone who does not care about you as a human being and are absolutely fine with taking your life. And that's a reality. That's just a reality. So listen to those stories and lend your support in terms of just allowing them to share their truth.
Yeah, I think social media has kind of been a double-edged sword in that, where there have been plenty of things that haven't gotten right because of social media. But on the other hand, it's been powerful because there's so many stories that a lot of people wouldn't normally have seen or heard because they don't have that kind of exposure to people who are afraid all the time.
Right. I mean, people have told me time and time again, I grew up in Montana, and, seeing you on Reading Rainbow was my first and only exposure to a person of color. Our media sources, because of their ubiquity, can be illuminative and illustrative. I say all the time, all television, or in this case, all media, is educational. Question is, what are we teaching?
Yeah.
Right? So the influence of the media, and we can include social media in that conversation now, is powerful, and we have to be mindful of how powerful it is. But we also have to be mindful that we are being, based on our clicking habits, we are being fed information in an attempt to sell stuff, right? Because your behavior follows you around.
Yeah.
And the ads that you see and the news that you see is in large measure determined and dictated by the profile that you are to these companies, these corporations. So I think at least some of the divide that we all experience in the country right now is due to the misuse of the technology. It's being weaponized against us, and that's never a good thing.
Yeah, I think that just shows how diverse teams lead to diverse products that are for everyone.
Mm-hmm.
We need to really focus on building teams, building experiences that are for everyone, not just to push a product, not just by a team of white dudes who want to get this product made for more white dudes. We need to have products made for everyone so that everyone can be included and a part of the stories that we consume and tell.
Hollywood is the worst in that regard. The report just came out recently that you would think that this business would be at the forefront of bringing different voices to the table, different perspectives, different points of view. But no, I mean, the percentage of women directors, Black directors of color is abysmal. And like many other sectors of the economy, my industry must do better. It's as simple as that. We have to do it.
Yeah, and I think luckily with voices like yours, where people are speaking up more about it, and it's slowly but surely changing. It feels like. I'm cautiously optimistic, but I guess we'll see in a few years how the trends go.
Well, you know what it feels like to me? It feels different in as much as I was really encouraged this summer when there were so many young people in the street. And that's what felt to me. It feels to me like we are massing to some sort of critical point, approaching critical mass where these long needed changes are really beginning to be possible. There's still a lot of resistance. You can see it and feel it, but it really does feel like this old way of doing things, this old way of being is beginning to go away. We're certainly not there yet, but the signs are good. The indications are really good that we might be able to make sustained and lasting change with this generation.
Yeah, I love seeing young people get excited about things and passionate about these things. And that is another one of those things where social media and technology is playing such a big part of it. So many of the boycotts and worldwide, completely globally. And there's so many things where they were able to, even though so many young people couldn't vote because of their age, they were still able to organize protests and boycotts and organize rallies and stuff. And it's so exciting to see this kind of energy happen and a wave is coming of change, and it's so cool to see.
Yeah, for me, this generation they have already staked their claim as stakeholders in this society. That what happens to the environment, what happens, to the country, what happens to education, what happens to how much money we devote to war and the machinery of war. They have already decided that this is a world that they're going to inherit, and they feel a certain way about it. And and they're going to have their voices heard. And I love and respect that.
Yeah, it's so exciting. Okay, I'm going to switch gears a little bit. Okay. I would love to hear about your book, The Rhino Who Swallowed a Storm. What motivated you to write it?
I love talking about Rhino. What motivated me was another one of those days in America, right? Where someone had gone into a public place with an automatic weapon and killed many people. I think on this particular occasion, it was a movie theater in Colorado. And I was thinking, wow, because these events kept happening, and it was tornadoes and floods and fires and mass shootings. And I thought, who is talking to kids about all of these incidents and occurrences? Because if Fred Rogers was here, if Mr. Rogers were here, he would be the one talking in an age-appropriate way to the audience of children about how to cope, how to deal with the world that has so many repeated tragedies, right? Where we're always experiencing loss, and how do we deal with the losses that we keep experiencing, right? Where do we draw our resilience from? And Fred was gone, and so I really tried to see who else might there be. And at the end of my conversation with myself, I had convinced myself that I should try. I should try and write the book. And that's how it began. But and then so I began with Fred, and one of his sayings, because Fred always said, "Look for the helpers," right? Look for the helpers. And so Rhino is a story about a young rhino whose everything he knew was washed away in a terrible storm. And his response to seeing his whole world destroyed was to actually swallow the storm. And now he's got a problem of how to get the storm out. And it sends him on a quest where he encounters helpers who really help him through this period of adjustment from loss to recovery. And I think it's a story that has value for not just kids, but for all of us, especially these days. We have all in the past year experienced a loss of some kind or another, even if it's only the loss of being able to freely travel and see our friends and classmates, right? So we are all really intimately familiar at this point with the idea of loss, and we could all use some support in healing those losses and recovering from them, incorporating them, allowing them to help build who we are without defining who we are, right? Yeah. So you want to incorporate the loss. That's where character comes from, the ability to persevere, right? The ability to get through it and to draw strength from the experience of having gotten through it.
Yeah. Oh, that's beautiful. I got to buy that for myself.
Well, you can go to LeVarBurton.com and get your very own copy of Rhino.
Perfect. Well, speaking of that, does cozying up in a comfortable chair with a good book still hold value in 2021 with so many of our content consumptions moving online to streaming and to podcasts and to audiobooks?
It does. It absolutely does. I certainly hope so. I believe it has great value, and I continue to engage in self-care that involves a big comfy chair and something delicious to read. I don't think I will ever surrender that, even if I'm doing it on a tablet,
Yeah.
For me, people ask me all the time, tablet reading or a bound book for my kids. And I say, you know what, I don't care. I just want kids to read. Now, there is such a thing as age appropriate where the technology is concerned. And we're all being guinea pigs right now because we're the first generation to have these devices around us in our hands and around our bodies, as often as we do. But we do know that there's a certain time during the formulation and maturation of a human being where the brain and the brain's plasticity is really fragile. So we don't want to do anything harmful. So we have to be mindful of how much screen time, babies and small children have. However, when we're talking about, having cracked the code and becoming a reader for life, it doesn't matter to me as long as kids are reading.
Yeah, absolutely. And you have a podcast where you still read, right?
I do, yeah. Because I have a podcast because reading aloud is one of my favorite ways of storytelling, and I love reading aloud, and I love short stories. And I thought, well, if I were going to do a podcast, what would it be? Well, it would be me reading short stories, one in every episode. And so that's what I do on LeVar Burton Reads. I pick a short story, a different one every week, and I read it. And I introduce it and give you a little background on maybe the author and the story. And then I read the story, and then I do a little sort of postscript at the end where I talk a little bit about how the story might have impacted me or what it brought up for me. And that's it. We add some atmospheric sound and light scoring just to locate you in the feeling of the story. But it's not a lot of production enhancement at all. It really is very, 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 very sparse. And I love it, and people seem to as well, especially adults now who grew up on reading Rainbow. For some reason, they say the sound of my voice is like a Valium or something.
It's kind of true.
I don't exactly know how that works, but I'll have to take their word for it.
Yeah, no, it's very, very true. And you are not the first one to say that, because I have heard that said multiple times where they're just like, ooh, he has a podcast. I can just listen to this before bed. It's the perfect bedtime story.
There you go.
There you go.
But you know what? I'm not mad at him, because again, during this time, which has been so stressful for all of us, finding ways to engage in self-care has been essential. Yeah, absolutely essential. And if being read a story before bed is what promotes a good full night's sleep for you, I am not mad.
Yeah.
Do that thing. No, really, do that thing. Because nothing is more important than our health, mental, physical, spiritual, emotional. I think that if we pay attention to keeping those aspects of ourselves healthy, you can live a long and happy life in the body.
It's so good. Whenever I read before bed instead of scrolling through Twitter or watching a TV show, I sleep so much better, and it's keeps the story in my head a little bit so I can dream about it. There's so many things.
Yes, I love going from story to sleep and having elements of that story show up in my dreams.
Yeah.
It's always very cool.
It's always very exciting. So arguably your most famous catchphrase going back to your reading Rainbow days is, "But you don't have to take my word for it." It's a very simple phrase, but it carries a compelling nugget of truth about the importance of seeking knowledge for ourselves. Yeah. Why do you think that phrase resonates so much with people?
Whew, boy, you're really tossing the hard ones at me today.
I'm sorry.
I mean, I believe it has something to do with exactly what you just said, that it is a caution to take ownership and agency over that which you put your faith and stock in this life. And the idea that you don't have to take anybody's word for it, because you have the wherewithal to pick up a book, take a look, and divine for yourself what your position is, what truth you will align yourself with. If you are literate in at least one language, you are, by my definition, free, at least mentally free, because no one can oppress you based on the idea that they can control you vis-a-vis the information that they feed you. Now, we have been, we've gone through a period now where there has been a lot of debate about what actually is the truth. But I'm not going for the okie doke. There is a truth. There is no such thing as an alternate fact. And gaslighting is real. People who want to control you will tell you what they want you to hear and dare you to disagree with them. And it is true. Human beings, it's real. Sometimes we just feel overwhelmed. Sometimes it's easier to let somebody else do the work, and then you just go along with the crowd. But we have to be discerning people. We have to have discernment. Discernment is one of my favorite words in language. And the metaphor for discernment is a knife. And I love knives. I collect them. Because a knife is a weapon or a tool. The most appropriate use is determined by the wielder, right? It's the same thing, but it is the intention of the person with the knife that determines whether it's a weapon or a tool. And I just love the concept that discernment means that you have the ability to figure it out for yourself, to see through the guise, right? To cut through the noise to truth, to the what is.
I love that. And that can be applied to so many things too, that even on the technological front, almost every single time someone says, what's the best way to code this? What's the best way to do that? Good 50% or more of the time, I'm like, you kind of have to be discerning and figure out how you want to do it, because it's so true. You have to learn the pros and cons of everything. You have to figure out what is the truth for you in ways of building things, in ways of understanding things, in ways of interpreting things, everything.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We are in agreement there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, I have one final question for you.
Oh my.
You've had a lot of iconic roles, perhaps none more prolific than your 2-episode run playing yourself on Community.
Yes.
Oh, loved that episode. I definitely watched it again before this because I was myself crying in the bathroom singing Butterfly in the Sky. Where does Donald Glover's Singing, Reading Rainbow, that theme song Through Tears on the bathroom floor, where does it rank as you look back on your imprint and legacy in pop culture?
Top 5, no question about it. Top 5. Top 5. Because for a couple of reasons. One, Donald Glover.
Yes, artist and genius. Yeah.
Enough said. Genius. And two, because it's emblematic of an energy that I got to tell you I encounter all the time. It's exaggerated, right? It's heightened, but that's basically my life. And I'm not going to say I understand it. However, I do love it. I love it. Because what it says to me, what it reflects back to me is that there's something that I have done that has brought value to their lives, and that they are appreciative of that, even to the point of being tongue-tied or bursting into tears in my presence. I have had both happen, and it happens a lot, and so I embrace it. I do. And the way Donald was just genius at really capturing the essence of that and showing ourselves to ourselves.
Yeah. Oh, and I really liked your I think it was an improv line where you're just like, oh, more food or something for your
More
Roots
fish for
character.
Kunta. More
More
fish
fish
for
for
Kunta.
Kunta. That's what it
Yeah,
was.
yeah, more
Such a
fish for
funny
Kunta.
line.
It's my best ad lib in 44 years of showbiz.
Mwah, perfect. Well, LeVar, I appreciate you. I know everyone listening appreciates you. Thank you so, so much for your time today and for your great insights.
You were fantastic. I loved our conversation. I look forward to being able to do it again.
Thank you. All right, have a good one.
You too.
Man, what an incredible conversation. If you told 8-year-old me that someday I'd be chatting with LeVar Burton, the person reading to me on TV, oh, I would have never believed it. And okay, I know it's hard to believe, but Tech Skills Day only gets better from here. Up next, I'd like to introduce my co-host, Jeremy Morgan. He's a tech blogger, author, volunteer firefighter, and tech evangelist at Pluralsight, who gets to chat with the Microsoft Partner Program Manager, podcaster, and developer, Scott Hanselman.
Hello, Scott. Thank you for joining us today.
How's it going?
Not bad. How are you?
I'm living the dream, although we should be talking in person at a cafe somewhere, but one day soon we will.
One day soon. Yes, it's not far of a drive, but haven't seen a cafe in quite a while, to be honest. So we have a lot of software developers and aspiring software developers tuning in today. For viewers who are meeting you for the first time, tell us a little bit about how you got into tech and how you got to where you are today.
Oh my goodness. Long story short, so I've been in tech for a very, very long time, and I was the first in my family to graduate from university and the first technical person. My parents are people who work with their hands. My mom was a zookeeper. My dad was a firefighter. So, having a computer in the house was not a thing that was gonna happen. But there was a computer made available to me by one of my teachers, and this was at a time when there wasn't a computer per student or even a computer per class. There was a computer per school. So having a computer available to us as a school and then having time at night and on weekends, I had a very encouraging teacher that let me have that access. And it's just so important for early in career people to have access to computers. Had I not had that, I would have been probably a very successful zookeeper or firefighter, but I'm very blessed to have had a 30-year career as a technologist. And it was because someone said, hey, I think you might enjoy computers. Let me let you borrow this one for a little while. And that was where it all started.
Yeah, that's awesome. So for new folks wanting to get into development, are there some core skills that they should focus on? I mean, problem solving being an obvious one.
Indeed. I have always felt that we spend a lot of time trying to teach people how to code, but we don't spend a lot of time teaching people how to think about systems and how systems fit together. I think that there's a lot of really great web developers that can do great things in HTML and JavaScript and CSS, but as soon as you kind of press F12 in Chrome or in Edge and you see the tools, and then you start going a couple layers down, the abstractions start to leak. And the question would be then, if you're a web developer or an IT professional, how much about the computer do you need to know? The analogy I like to use a lot is one of a car. You can be a great Uber passenger. You can get from point A to point B. So you're a very successful Lyft or Uber passenger. You can use a taxi. As a taxi rider, you don't really need to know about tires and internal combustion engines, and you don't need to change your oil. That's really the job of the taxi driver or their mechanic. But you're driving a taxi, you're in a Lyft, and somehow the car breaks down and you're on the side of the road. Are you going to be able to help jack the car up and work on the tires? Or are you going to watch the driver do it or wait for a mechanic? I'm not saying that everyone has to be a professional mechanic and be able to take apart a vehicle and rebuild the engine. But if you can think about the layer of abstraction that you're working at, if you're early in career, you're thinking about HTML and JavaScript, and if you can just go one layer below your comfort zone, just maybe think about HTTP. Or if you already work at the HTTP level, I'm just going to think about TCP. Inevitably, you'll find out that driving a stick shift, driving a manual stick car, while not a regular thing that you would do all the time, will make you a better driver and make you understand the vehicle that you're in. And in this context, the vehicle is the internet.
Yeah, absolutely. That makes a lot of sense. So are there some different mental models or approaches to problem solving that folks should use? Like you mentioned, the tire breaking down. Is there a different way of approaching problem solving for developers?
I think that the fundamental and the first and the easiest way is, of course, what they call bisection. It's like asking yes/no questions at scale. One of my favorite examples of that is when I was teaching some young women at a Women Who Code event how to code, and they were like, "Hey, this guy is here you've never heard of, and he's going to teach you how to code. Yay! Hey, kids, let's learn how to code." I was trying to make toast today, and I can't get my toaster to turn on. And I just let the awkwardness be there. And they're like, "We want to learn how to code." And I was like, "Yeah, but I have no toast." And then one of them said, "Well, does the toaster have any power?" I was like, "I don't know. How would I check that?" And they said, "Well, you should plug a lamp in next to the toaster." I said, "The lamp doesn't turn on." And then their brains started moving, and all these young women were great coders and developers, and they didn't already know it. And then one of them said, "Do the neighbors have power?" Do the neighbors have
Wow.
power? I just wanted toast. And this young lady is basically asking if it's DNS, because it's always DNS, right?
Always.
So she's
Yeah.
thinking about the neighbors. One of them wanted to know if aliens had like done an EMP and like, destroyed the power in the neighborhood. All of this because I wanted toast, because they were thinking about the system within which the toaster exists and all of the requirements that would make one have toast. Then I said, "You see how you're thinking about this? You see how you're problem solving this? Everyone is a natural problem solver. All you did was ask yes, no questions. It's just like when you do 20 questions to try to guess a celebrity name or something. That's all I've been doing for 30 years. So then what's the difference between a later in career and early in career developer? I know the questions to ask because I've seen them before. So it's pattern matching. So what we need to do is give younger and earlier in career developers a safe place to ask those questions, be wrong as often as possible without feeling uncomfortable about it. I think if I was a junior engineer at a big company and I'm working with you and I ask a question and you make me feel bad, probably not going to ask a question again. So I'm going to just sit and suffer and think that I can maybe Google or Stack Overflow myself out of that problem. I was given the gift of asking dumb questions because there aren't any dumb questions. Then we should make sure that early in career people do that. And sites like Pluralsight and Stack Overflow need to make those kinds of things available where we can ask those questions.
Absolutely. And that touches a little on psychological safety, which is something that we talk about in DevOps. I don't feel like it's talked about enough in software development. Do you think that's an important consideration for leaders, whether they're leading juniors or veterans, creating a space where people can do that, where they can ask those questions and they can feel free to fail, if you will.
Yeah, I think that in the past, and even people who might be watching this, they might be saying, "Yeah, these are a bunch of squishy guys talking about safe spaces and, suck it up, Buttercup." There was an old Saturday Night Live video that you can go and find that was called "Nick Burns, Your Company's Computer Guy," and it was Jimmy Fallon, and he had on big Buddy Holly glasses with a broken thing in the center, and someone asked a harmless question about a printer that they wanted to get working. And the joke was that Nick Burns, your company's computer guy, would go, "Move," and he would shove you aside and he'd go, "That wasn't so hard, and then they play the logo. Is that what we want our community to be known for? Because that was a trope in the 80s. Is that a trope now? That's not cool. I don't want anybody to feel like that.
Yeah, part of the reason that was funny at the time is because I think it was very accurate for the time. I don't know that it's so accurate now, but
it may be more accurate than we realize. And I think it's on later in career people to catch that kind of stuff. And I will admit that I've caught myself, maybe not being that much, but even something like, being impatient as a senior engineer, I don't think that's something that I need to show. I need to have infinite patience. And that's called lending your privilege. A good friend of mine, Anwan Simmons, has a great talk you can find called Lending Privilege. He's a Black man in tech who is my age, and he has privileges in his position at his company and being a man, and he lends that privilege, and he's got unlimited privilege to lend, which is great. Different privilege than I have as a white man in tech, but the recognition of that and the naming of that was really cool. So when I meet early in career people, I do the best I can to lend my privilege, be it my level at the company, I'm kind of high up at the company, or my age, or my knowledge, because I'm not going to be doing this forever. I want to retire. So I got a bunch of stuff that I'd love to share, and that's why I want to get that knowledge out to the young people.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree with that. Now, a lot of people are tuning in here today because they want to level up their tech skills and kind of, bring it to the next level. What advice do you have for them for just leveling up, at any experience level?
I think that watching a masterclass or just looking at your Pluralsight queue and saying, I'm just going to learn some stuff, that will teach you some things with, via osmosis. I love masterclass. I like Pluralsight, but am I just going to randomly watch something idly in the background? I would encourage people who are really interested in leveling up to make it more formal. Give yourself the gift of intentionality. Sit down and say, I'm going to make a spreadsheet of the skills that I think I might need. I'm going to Google around and Bing around and try to get a list. And just like you would do this in university, did I do the notes? Did I take notes? Did I watch the video? Make a spreadsheet, make a Google sheet, make an Office sheet, and say, here's the 30 classes that I want to watch. It might take a year, but the addition of that intentionality and that checklist, whether it's on paper or in a Google sheet, is going to make you feel like you have decided to do this and decided to level up, as opposed to hoping leveling up will happen by default.
Yes, absolutely. Just kind of giving yourself a goal or something to work towards, or.
Well, a great example right now is that I'm an old man who is working on getting my black belt in Taekwondo. And there are things that I can't do that the other young people can do. And I've been doing it now for many years, and it is a challenge, but I try to arrive each day in the dojang with a sense of intentionality. Like, I'm here for the next 2 hours a couple of times a week, and I'm going to give myself this gift. And if I were not present, then I might as well not have shown up. I'm not saying I need to be like hustle culture intensity 40 hours a week, but if I'm going to level up, I'm going to set aside a couple of hours, a couple of days a week, and I'm going to do it. I'm going to sprint for the next 2 hours. And I think Pluralsight is a good place to sprint.
Yeah. Let's talk about two ways you can get into tech: mentorship versus sponsorship, and what that means.
For a long time, I had mentees, and I thought of myself as a mentor. And I realized as I was mentoring young people that rather than having a relationship like this as a peer, young or not, early in career or not, I had inadvertently changed the leverage of that. And I was basically lecturing someone once a week. Like, I have some wisdom and I share the wisdom. Oh, thank you for the wisdom. And I realized that they have stuff to tell me as well. So by changing that relationship, my mentorship experiences became much more fulfilling. Then I started to realize that sponsorship is really a spectrum, and sponsoring someone isn't just talking to them and giving them great advice and being, an awesome old person to talk to, but it's also allowing them to come into rooms. So that conversation we had before about lending privilege, to sponsor someone is to think about when they're not there, to say, hey, you should come on Pluralsight, talk to Jeremy. You should go and, hey, they have a free month here. Always be thinking about them and let them know about opportunities. If there's a panel, invite them on the panel. If there's an opportunity to present at work, invite them to present at work. You have unlimited amounts of that as someone who is later in career. And if you're like me, where you're kind of, in the waning years of your career, the last 10 or 20 years, and someone else is coming up, send the ladder back down. That's sponsorship, and that's fundamentally different than weekly lectures.
Yeah, absolutely. That's great. So thank you so much for joining us today. Is there anything else you'd like to add before we go?
Selfishly, I would encourage people to take a look at my podcast. I've done a podcast called Hansel Minutes. My last name is Hanselman, like Hansel and Gretel man. And Hansel Minutes is actually named because I'm a really bad estimator. And people would say, hey, Scott, can you write this software for me? And I would say, yeah, about 30 minutes, 40 minutes. And be like, is that Hansel Minutes or real minutes? Because I'm not very good. And the show is a 30-minute long technology conversation with fresh faces that you probably haven't seen somewhere else. And it's somewhat unique in the podcasting space in that it has almost 800 episodes. So 15,
Wow.
16 years, every Thursday. It's kind of like Fresh Air, if you've ever listened to National Public Radio or Science Friday. And it's a pretty good show. And I've just recently added transcripts, searchable transcripts. So if there's a technology or a person that you want to hear from, you can go to hanselminutes.com, click on shows, search the entire transcript, and go directly to where we start talking about that technology. So I would encourage people to check that out.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm a huge fan of that podcast myself, so I second that. Well, thank you very much for joining us today.
Absolutely, my pleasure.
So that was a great conversation with Scott Hanselman. Deborah Kurata is a software developer and a Pluralsight author. If you've ever taken a Pluralsight course on C# or Angular, you likely already know her name. Here's a conversation I had with her recently about finding your developer superpower. Welcome back, and thanks for joining us again this year, Deborah. Now, you've made an incredible reputation for yourself. What are some of the exciting things that you've worked on that you're particularly proud of in your career?
I'm really proud of the fact that I've been able to help developers, especially beginners or those entering into some new technologies. I'd always wanted to be a teacher, so it fulfills a dream for me. And it also has the nice side effect of being able to help others, especially Angular and C# developers. It's been just such a fun experience.
Yeah, absolutely. And that was originally how you started your track, wasn't it? You were going to start as a teacher, and then you have kind of an interesting story about how you got into tech.
Well, in high school, I'd actually joined the Future Teachers of America because I was going to be a teacher. But I later got very into science and decided to go get a degree in physics instead. So my background is actually in physics and math. And I got into technology as a way to help pay my way through college. I got a job at the college computer lab, because back then you had to actually go to a lab to use a computer. And that's how I got started.
So what is some advice that you would give to software engineers or aspiring software engineers?
Well, everyone feels imposter syndrome, right? From time to time, you just feel like you're not good enough. Someone's always faster at software development, or knows more, or has more Twitter followers, or has better projects, or a higher pay, or whatever. And it makes us sometimes feel like we just aren't good enough to be here. And it's really important to find your own superpower. So that's my advice, to really find what you're good at. We all have a technical superpower, right? Something that in technology we are really good at, something that makes us special. You know, maybe you're the one who best empathizes with your customers or your users. Or maybe you're the one who finds common ground between your team members as you're discussing topics. Or maybe you're the one who really architects your applications well and breaks them into pieces for the team. Or maybe you're the one that helps everyone gets unstuck and keeps your project moving. Or maybe you can explain things better than anyone else to other members of the team, or to some of your users who are stuck or having difficulty. Maybe you're the one who knows just the right words to put into Google in order to find the right Stack Overflow article to solve your problem. We all have unique and amazing abilities, and sometimes they get lost in the day-to-day work that we do, and they get kind of buried and forgotten. And so it's really important to take some time and identify what your superpowers are, what makes you unique. Maybe start by sitting down and writing what things that you enjoy, what things that you're good at. But don't just do it one time and, you know, staring at a blank piece of paper. Do it over a week or several weeks. Every time you attack a task that really brings you joy, you know, write that down as something that might be your superpower. Or if there is something that you started doing and suddenly time seems to disappear, maybe that's really one of your superpowers, one of the things that you're good at. It's important to identify how you're different and what you bring to the table, what you bring to your organization and to your team.
Yeah, that's a very interesting way to think about it, rather than just a bulleted list of skills. You can have those skills plus I'm really good at bash scripting, or I'm really good at looking things up. You mentioned that. I'll admit that I was that developer for a long time. I'm really good at Googling and Stack Overflowing things.
And that is a superpower, actually. Yeah, and there is a big difference between strengths and skills. Strengths are your actual inherent abilities, where skills are something that you learn. Like, for example, my eldest daughter is incredibly smart. She is a cancer researcher and is currently working on being able to determine whether someone has colon cancer without having to do a colonoscopy. Now, who wasn't one person trying to do that? But one of the things that she's absolutely horrible at is spelling. She cannot spell, the poor child. When she was in 6th grade, she achieved the skill of being able to memorize her spelling words. So she got 100% on all of her spelling tests because she had the skill and absolutely no strengths whatsoever in spelling to memorize her spelling words. So since she had the highest spelling grade, her teacher picked her to represent the class in the spelling bee. Poor child, oh my goodness, because there's no way that she could memorize the entire dictionary. So she did horribly and was very embarrassed. But that kind of points out the difference between skills and abilities. You can make yourself, you can improve yourself with things you aren't good at with skills, but your real strengths are where your superpowers lie.
So you know more about Angular than anyone else I can think of. How do you learn new features and techniques in Angular when they're released?
Well, one of the things that's important to really stay up both on your skills and on your strengths is to practice. And so practicing is very helpful. It also is really important to stay up with what's happening in the industry. So keep track of what changes are happening. Keep track of blog posts of what the Angular team is doing. Same thing for C#. I also do a lot of C#. So I, just yesterday attended a C# language team at Microsoft, one of their team meetings, in order to be up on what it is that they're doing and changing. So you can kind of think of it, if you've seen like the Queen's Gambit. That story is about a woman who just is incredibly good at chess, and she doesn't just then go play chess. And so us as developers, we can't necessarily just go code. It's also important to really strengthen and learn skills. So in the example of the Queen's Gambit, I mean, she reads everything that she can find on it. She finds magazines, she gets books, she practices in her head what her chess game is going to be like, and she learns all of the different strategies. And so it's important for us as developers to not only just practice, but to also expand that knowledge. Read blog posts, read Stack Overflow articles. And of course, there is Pluralsight. Pluralsight has an amazing set of courses on all of these technologies and can really help you boost your superpowers.
Absolutely. So how do developers boost their strengths once they've identified them? Like you mentioned, kind of taking notes of everything and saying, okay, this is the thing that really makes my heart sing, and this is the thing that I really enjoy. Like, say, for me, it was being a back-end developer. I tried front-end stuff, I tried back-end stuff. And then when I got into back-end development, I'm like, this is what I really like to do. And, I made that decision, like, this is the area I want to be in. How can you start to build those strengths once you've identified the area that you want to be in, or where you want your superpowers to be.
Yeah, it's important then to really study that area. So if you find that you're really good at debugging, for example, maybe you want to spend some time watching some courses on debugging, following what's going on. If you're front end, doing the browser debugging. If you're back end, doing debugging of stored procedures, or doing debugging of C# applications, or whatever your superpower is. So it's two-pronged. Of course, one is the actual studying and reading and keeping up with what's going on. And then the other part is practice, practice, practice. Just do it. Do everything that you can to continue. They say that you need 10,000 hours to really get good at something. Captain Marvel, when she realized that she had superpowers, she didn't immediately know how to embrace them and use them all. It took a tremendous amount of practice and just continuing to improve and hone her skills before she could really realize that she could fly. So
Nice. So it almost sounds like preparing for the big game, like when an athlete goes out to play, it's not their first time that week or that month throwing a ball or anything like that. It's a whole bunch of preparation for a very short time to use it. So it's almost like when you go to jump in that code for the first time, make your first commit, there's weeks of preparation and practice and planning behind it.
Yep. Yeah, that's absolutely correct. And sometimes it's easy to feel discouraged because, you come in and you look at code and you're like, I have no idea what this code is even doing. And it can be very frustrating. And even if say example, coding Angular is your real superpower, and you get someone else's code and you have like, I have no idea what this code is even doing. And you suddenly feel like, well, maybe that's not what you should be doing or whatever. And the important thing is just to keep at it, to keep going. We all have moments where we fall, where Captain Marvel falls out of the sky. But
Absolutely.
you have to keep trying and keep after it, and keep practicing, keep reading, keep trying those Pluralsight courses, and you will just continue to enhance and improve those skills over time.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much for doing this. Final suggestions you'd like to give before we end this?
Yeah, make sure that you use those superpowers for good, right? Once you've identified what you're good at, volunteer for things in your company. Help the other team members leveraging those skills. If we can all work and leverage our superpowers, maybe we can make the world better, all in just small little steps. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you.
Great. Well, hello, everybody, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Right now, we are here with Mona Chalabi, and I'm so excited to be able to talk with you a little bit more. And I'd also like to have you introduce yourself to some people, because I know that you do some amazing artistry and data journalism, but I think you can probably describe yourself better than I can.
I mean, I think that's it. I'm a data journalist and artist. You nailed it. Nothing more to say.
Perfect. We're done here. But for real, I love your work. I've been stalking you on Twitter ever since I discovered who you are, and it's so impressive, some of the stuff that you've done. And I saw that Fortune recently named you 40 under 40. That's amazing. Congratulations on that.
Thank you.
So you've built a career unearthing and illustrating neglected data, and your work is just incredible. What led you to become a data editor and the phrase to take the num out of the numbers?
So after my degree, I went to work as part of an organization that is part of the United Nations, right? So I was doing something called monitoring and evaluation work, where we were looking at statistics of vulnerable populations and then trying to produce reports about them. And basically, I just felt like a lot of the work that existed wasn't particularly good. It was only reaching a really, really small audience. So journalism felt like a really natural environment to go into, because obviously having a large audience is quite inherent to journalism. At least it's an aspiration of many journalists. And yeah, the data visualization stuff just naturally came as part of that. Yeah.
That is so awesome. And how do you choose which stories you want to tell with the data that you are unearthing and sharing with the world?
I think very often I would say the stories fall into two categories. One are the ones where they're part of existing conversations that are happening. So this thing is in the news, everyone's talking about it, but they're not really understanding one aspect of it. So I think very often stories can have more impact when there's an existing conversation that's taking place. To give one example, I saw the recent news about a ban, I forget which state it was in, was it Iowa, on hormone medicine for trans kids.
I don't know if that was Iowa or Alabama. Anyway.
Alabama sounds like it would make sense based on the state's history on access to abortion. Anyway, so in a case like that, I would be thinking about data on how many trans kids are going to be affected by this, and also what is the history of that medication, right? How long has it been safely prescribed for? Has it been safely prescribed to cis kids, which has often been the case, without any kind of public debate? For example, cis kids who engage in sports activities where they request that kind of medication, and again, no kind of public outcry. So that for me seems like a natural place to find that data. And then the other place I come up with stories is honestly just my inbox. People write to me saying, you know, I'm a public teacher in, I don't know, Des Moines, and here's something that came up in my classroom, and can you take a look at it? And I find those to be really, really important sources of ideas, because obviously, you know, I don't think data is perfectly neutral and objective, and my understanding of stories is shaped by my experience and who I am. So it's really important I have the opportunity to hear these other voices from other people that are saying, this is the data that matters to me. Can you find a way to bring it to life?
That's so cool. And how many of those stories would you say come from your inbox and stuff? I imagine you get a lot of those kinds of emails.
Yeah. Honestly, I think like 50% of them.
Wow.
And very often it will also be in my inbox that people will respond to an existing piece of work that I've done. And that then inspires another line of questioning. So to give an example, today I published a piece on The Guardian about firearms in the US. Again, another huge subject, right? So again, seeing a few very high profile, unfortunately, mass shootings in the US using assault weapons, which again inspires this public debate yet again about banning assault weapons. And what the article was looking at was the way that actually banning assault weapons, I mean, as important as it is, really only just scratches the surface, because we know that weapons have an incredibly long lifespan. We know there's 15 to 20 million of them already in circulation. And if those weapons can last for 100 years or more, you know, a ban really is only just the beginning. So anyway, I published this piece, and this morning I woke up to an email in my inbox from a reader saying, why is no one talking about ammunition bans? And whatever, I literally just glanced at that email before jumping on with you. But I'm just like, wow, that's a really interesting thought. Let me look into that. Are there any case studies in different countries that have tried ammunition bans? Is it effective? What is the cost of doing bans like that? People just have really fantastic ideas that aren't necessarily going to occur to me. It's great.
Yeah, that's a really good use case of it. And so, because this gun bans and the abortion thing, those are controversial topics. So one might argue they shouldn't be, but they are. Do you get negative responses from it, or rather, is that something that you're ever bombarded with? Is it ever just discouraging, or is it something that it's kind of comes with the territory?
The only thing I get discouraged by, I wouldn't even say discouraged. The only thing that ever concerns me are questions or comments about the accuracy of my information. It's all that I'm striving for. Anything else, like, you know, if someone wants to leave a comment saying trans kids don't have the right to access that medication, someone's more than welcome to leave that comment. I don't really care. It has no impact on me whatsoever.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, actually, I would say sometimes I kind of wish they didn't leave that comment in case it alienates other people who are reading on that post. But besides that, the comments that really, really like keep me awake at night will be, you know, I actually initially misunderstood this because I read the wrong axis. And then I'm like thinking, oh God, how can I improve design to make sure that no one comes with one set of ideas and leaves with a different set of information than what is actually accurate? Yeah, those are the things that I worry about.
Yeah, well, I can imagine. And so what do you do to ensure that the data is sound? And like, what's your process for doing that kind of research?
I mean, honestly, I think in some respects it might be similar to your work and similar to a lot of the people who are watching right now. It's user testing. It's not it's not really what's done in journalism, right? You don't just publish a piece to like a small handful of people and make sure that they understand it. So instead I try to kind of replicate that just using SMS technology. So I'll like have a group chat or a WhatsApp group with, I don't know, anywhere between 3 and 10 people that are friends, family, and I'll just send them an illustration and say, does this make sense to you? Or I'll send them 2 or 3 versions of an illustration, ask them which one is the clearest. And it's not great, right? Because obviously the people who are in my network might have certain things in common.
Right, certain bias.
Yeah, certain biases. Most of my friends have a similar political inclination to me. Most of them, the vast majority are women. You know, how do those things mean that they might also interpret information in similar pattern to what I do? But it's what I have for now, and I'm still always trying to think about ways to systematize that with a much broader group of people. Yeah.
And so what kinds of systems have you thought about outside of the group chats and stuff?
It's really difficult, right? What I've honestly thought about is almost having like a user group that I would pay on like a monthly basis to work. And in journalism, generally, it's considered a huge no-no to pay anyone for their time. Because it would, which I think is totally legitimate. It's a concern that if you paid a source, for example, to tell you, you know, this is what they think about this new government policy, or whatever, you could be, it could encourage them to say one thing or another.
Or what you want to hear.
Yeah. But I feel like it's actually really, really problematic that a lot of the time, journalists are either speaking to the exact same group of experts that are very often like, you know, academic professors, don't know, legal experts, whatever, or they're speaking to people from quite, I want to say underprivileged, but I always think that word kind of doesn't make sense. Honestly, so like quite poor people who don't have much access to resources and just saying, hey, can you chat to me for an hour? I'm sorry, I can't give you anything for that. And that also fits comfortably with me. So I think for me, in this one particular scenario of showing people data visualizations and saying to them, please don't be afraid to tell me if you don't understand this. It doesn't make you stupid. It means that I've messed up. I don't feel any qualms with paying people for that. I just need to figure out what does it mean to have a representative demographic pool for that? How can I make sure that that group rotates? I'm not asking too much of them. Those are the things I'm kind of grappling with at the moment. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a really interesting problem to solve. Like, it's kind of getting my engineer brain turning like, ooh, I wonder if we could make an app for this. Because that's a real problem that I think, yeah, it's not just something that journalists deal with. It is something that like teams deal with where user testing, you don't want to just get a certain group of people looking at something that you're building or something like that. And there's only so many people in the world who would want to be continually asked, does this make sense?
I mean, even my friends are getting sick of me, and they like, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Do journalists ever help other journalists with it? Like, I wonder if there's like
they do, but really, really problematic. I mean, part of the reason I went into these hand-drawn visualizations was because I found myself in a workplace that was incredibly bro-ish, where the bros would show each other the incredibly complicated interactives that they'd built, and they'd be like, whoa, like incredible graphics, really, really cool. And I'd just be like,
yeah,
English as a second language has no chance of understanding this. But you, because of who you are, it would never even occur to you to make journalism accessible to people who speak English as a second language.
Right.
And I found it so infuriating. And honestly, journalism is still overwhelmingly white and middle class. So
Yeah.
I don't really think that reaching out to my peers is going to get me to that point of creating information is as accessible as possible to the largest group of people that I can possibly reach.
That makes a lot of sense. And so when you do face those kinds of complex subjects that you do want to make accessible, do you ever hit just creative block on how to do that? Do you ever have to figure out how you'll do this and get stuck?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely reach those creative blocks, but I think the thing that's nice about data visualization is it's super structured, right? So for me, very often, the creative block comes at the creative bit. So it's like, let's say I'm trying to create an illustration about domestic violence rates in the US. For me, it's really difficult to come up with a visual language that is both compelling and easily understandable and graphic without being upsetting when it comes to difficult subjects like police shootings, domestic violence, anything that could honestly be triggering to someone. And I mean that in the true PTSD sense of the word. And the thing that's kind of helpful in some respects when it comes to data visualization is if I hit those blocks, I'm just going to go for quite a classic data visualization that isn't super, creative and graphic, because I don't want to cause anyone harm. I just really, really want to disseminate this information. So that can be the hardest bit, yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. I read an article somewhat recently that's kind of how the anime genre actually came to be, because they wanted to illustrate what happened in wars past and stuff, but it was too graphic to be able to use people and do live action and stuff. And so anime began to illustrate those kinds of concepts with cartoons, so that way it was more swallowable for audiences.
That's so interesting.
Isn't it so interesting? And now it's a whole genre in itself, but that was the origin piece for it.
But see, that's also interesting to me about whether I think our brains do really, really interesting things. And sometimes when something is abstract, and I'm not talking about abstract in the sense of like a simple bar chart, although I think that's the ultimate abstraction, but let's say anime is more abstract than video documentary. Our imaginations can do strange things to fill in the gaps.
That's true.
And
That's
I wonder
very
if
true.
sometimes that act of imagining can be even worse in some ways, because you could imagine the face of a loved one on a cartoon more than if it was actual video footage. Clearly that isn't the face of a loved one. But maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. I think people's brains think in very different ways.
Yeah, that's a really good way to put it, though. I hadn't thought of it that way. Oh man, I could dive into that deep. So speaking of making all these visualizations and stuff, how do you? Is it something that you sketch on paper first and then use another tool? What type of tools and technologies do you use to do it?
So the very first thing I do is just like look at the data set itself and try to see what's happening in the data set. Very often my questions are, who is affected by this thing? How has this thing changed over time? How does it vary depending on where you live in the country? Kind of like really simple journalistic questions. And then actually I use really conventional methods of data visualization. I'll generate a map or a line chart or a bar chart. And then I think about ways to make it visually tied to the subject matter. So if I'm creating a chart at the moment about glacier thinning over time, how can I make the chart itself not just be a simple line chart, but when you look at it, you feel connected to the subject matter?
Right.
What I'll then do is I'll create these hand-drawn visualizations, literally just using ink and paper. I scan them, and then I resize them in Photoshop so that they are as to scale, as precise as any computer-generated graphic. And I think they don't necessarily realize that when they're looking at my work, that it is actually super precise, but it intentionally doesn't look like it, because very often I think computer-generated graphics overstate the degree of accuracy. So they give this impression of like, the temperature tomorrow is going to be 22.3 degrees when we know it's going to be somewhere between 20 and 23. And when you have a hand-drawn line, you feel that imprecision. You feel inherently like, okay, it's a sense of a range. It's somewhere between here and here. And that is the truth about data. That's the truth about the way that we understand the world. There is a high degree of uncertainty, but you can capture that and show that to people in a way that's still valuable. there's still uncertainty about the efficacy of these vaccines. That's okay. There's no uncertainty about the question of whether or not they are effective and better than nothing. We can bound our uncertainty. We can say it's somewhere between here and here. And I think that saying it's somewhere between here and here is better than saying it's here. And I think that journalists have a temptation sometimes to say it's exactly here in order to build trust. But I think ultimately that just enhances people's skepticism, because they just feel like, how can you possibly tell me that fact with a decimal place? There's no way you can know the truth to decimal places. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's almost like a debate between trust and connection too, because I feel like when you do that handwritten stuff, it feels more human and real. Like I can understand it better because it's a person that's telling me this rather than a computer that generated it.
And that human aspect is again intentional, right? Because someone does create those computer-generated graphics, someone does create the algorithm, someone does build the data set, but all of that seems to kind of get washed away by the time you're looking at a clean, like abstract bar chart. And what I want to do is be honest about that human element. And when you look at a hand-drawn illustration, it's impossible to forget that a person drew it. There's no way that a computer could come up with that. And again, I think that feels more honest in some ways, because in some ways I'm actually being super upfront about the fact that I am a subjective journalist. I do believe trans kids should have access to medication, and here's why. And I'm kind of unapologetic about the fact that I have an opinion about the data that I'm showing you.
Yeah, that is so interesting. And so that's interesting that you do it on paper and then scan it in. Have you ever tried the tablet approach or anything?
And I just don't love it. Like I've tried it quite a few times, and I still use it for I use it for texture, I use it for shading. But it's amazing, even now, there are literally thousands and thousands and thousands of pen strokes you can use on the tablet to simulate different forms of ink. And none of them are as good as just drawing something and scanning it. It's amazing, yeah.
I agree. Yeah, I've tried drawing my own diagrams, which are not even half as beautiful as yours. And it's almost like because I have access to the undo button, I keep trying to make it just perfect and stuff. And then it kind of loses what I wanted to do with hand drawing in the first place.
And it's also just, it's no wonder that podcasts have become absolutely huge. Time away from our screens is really good for our mental health. And for me, it's like literally one of the only times during my waking hours, other than cleaning, that I'm not looking at a screen.
Yeah. Do you draw for fun ever, not just the data side of things?
I wish I did. I do it very, very rarely because I'm so focused on productivity.
Right.
Even my form of physical exercise is to clean because I'm killing two birds with one stone. I'm really bad at just doing for the sake of doing it. Yeah.
Same. I love the idea. Yeah, I love the idea of just reading for fun, drawing for fun, doing all these things. But now I'm I could be reading and learn something that I can apply to work and stuff like that. It's a real thing.
It's capitalism. It's just capitalism, the idea that everything has to have some kind of value.
Right. Yeah. We gotta fight against the man. Okay, well, that being said, are you looking to learn anything new this year, productivity or not?
Yeah, I'm always looking to learn new things. I have been scratching the surface of learning R for a while, and I definitely want to get much better at that. And talking about skills that aren't necessarily about work and my career and things that are just for me, and teaching myself how to do electrics, plumbing, vehicle repair. I really want to learn things so that, to be frank, they're professions that are incredibly male dominated, and I don't like the feeling of relying on a man to come into my personal space and quote me any price he likes to fix something when I learn those skills. Potentially electrocute myself in the process, but also.
I'm renovating a house right now, and I feel that so hard because there's little things where a contractor quoted me $3,000 to get rid of carpet, and I watched a YouTube video and I did it myself, and I'm proud of it.
Yeah, to do it.
Yeah, and it's productive, and it kind of makes you feel like you accomplished something.
Yeah, definitely. And again, it's so much about work. One of the things I like about illustration is that you have this physical product, which is another reason why I don't really like to do on tablets, because I get to keep and frame these pieces of paper. But so much of our work, including like online journalism, there's nothing to show for it. And so the idea of pressing a light switch and switching it on and seeing it come alive is exhilarating.
Like, I did that, yeah. And so in terms of the tech skills side or for learning R, how are you learning it? I haven't touched R in a few years myself.
I know, I actually think I'm like quite a few iterations behind you. I'm learning software that will soon be redundant, but
I mean, that's the language for data and statistics.
I think
and
it's relevant, but people also love Python, and maybe that's what I should really be learning. But I'm quite self-taught on loads of things. I taught myself Photoshop and Illustrator, and also animation. I taught myself. Although again, I need to keep up those skills, because I find that if 6 months pass and I haven't opened up the software, then I've kind of forgotten a ton of it. But for there's just so many online tutorials that you can take a look at, and they're, again, the thing that's really beautiful about so many of these things is if you can do like this initial chunk very often in quite a structured way, there is such an incredibly generous community around so many of these things that all you have to do is Google, how do I do this? And you'll find 40 responses where just generous people have explained to someone else in really clear and useful language, and it's just mystery solved straight away.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite things about tech is people being generous with learning and stuff, and whether it's in the form of like Stack Overflow answers or forums and Discord groups and stuff. I love seeing people give information away to help people learn this kind of stuff, because I didn't have that when I was learning how to code.
It's amazing. It's really, really amazing. Again, I'm always quite fascinated by it. Like, again, the data person in me wants to understand the demographics of who does that, and if there's like a certain personality type. Because I know it sounds really awful. I don't think I'm that person. As much as I want to like create and put out really useful information into the world, I think these are people that are truly generous in the most, like, they're not looking for any accolades, any recognition. They're just doing it.
They're just helping.
Yeah.
And it makes the whole industry just so much more accessible for anybody to pick up anything, because there might be like 20 articles or probably 10 times that to learn R, and you never know who might be learning from which article. And there's so much different language and approaches to it. And I love that. I think that's so cool.
I just want to say one thing, because we're talking about accessibility. I think both from my work and even for all of these blogs and everything that we're talking about, sometimes we can get quite seduced into the idea of like true accessibility on the internet and everything is available. And I think so many of us lose sight of the fact that in the US, a lot of people are still without internet access.
Yeah.
So, as I have like repeatedly tried to explain, using data is a developing country. Like, if you shed your ideas of what those places are and what it looks like to be in a developing country, America has left behind so many people that it's not this perfect platform, and many people in the US still don't have access to reliable, affordable the internet. Is shocking, really. Yeah.
Well, and a lot of your work is data accessibility and bringing that data to so many people. Unfortunately, not always those with internet, but it is important. In 2021, data accessibility is so necessary, especially with all the fake news out there and misinformation and everything.
Yeah, I mean, it's a huge responsibility, and I definitely feel like at the start of the pandemic that weighed on me especially heavily, because
I'm sure.
If I put out something that people misinterpret or misunderstand that actually shapes their public health behaviours, I was just like, I was so worried that I would be responsible for making someone unwell.
Yeah.
Ultimately, that anxiety and fear is a good thing. It meant that for a while I was just quiet. And ensuring that I was quadruple checking everything I did. And I think that that's a good thing. Yeah, it's a good thing for people to just be quiet, maybe.
Yeah, it is. And I can only imagine how nerve-wracking that was, though, because it's a responsibility that I hadn't considered, honestly, for a lot of journalists. So because there's so many people paying attention to data more now than ever in the pandemic and everything. How can someone like me, how can technologists in general improve data literacy and support that on our teams and for others?
I mean, some of it is what I just mentioned about user testing at the start of the conversation. I think don't just make sure that the data makes sense to you and your team. Ask yourselves if it will make sense to people who have learning disabilities, people who speak English as a second language, people who have dyslexia. You know, at bare minimum, for example, I have this plugin on my screen called Color Oracle, and I make sure that I try to make sure, sometimes I mess up, but I try to make sure on my checklist of things to do that any data visualization I create, I check on Color Oracle and I view that illustration as if I have a color blindness, and it will take you through all of the different
Interesting
color blindness. And very often the colors I've chosen, you can't read them anymore. So I just think, like, don't just assume that because it's on the internet, it's kind of accessible. There's a lot more steps to making work truly, truly accessible. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh man. So okay, we're starting to run out of time. And so I have one last question for you before we head off. But so in general, what are some ways that data can bring people together in a more inclusive way, in your opinion?
I actually think that sometimes that opportunity to bring people together happens in the spreadsheet itself. Sometimes when I'm looking through at a subject like, for instance, let's say access to abortion, right? And it will, let's say it has like socioeconomic data about who can get access to an abortion, and you see that people in the lowest economic groups who aren't able to travel to a place to be able to access an abortion are the least likely to be able to do it. That to me is actually in some ways a group of people being able to speak as one in a spreadsheet. And that's across a bunch of different subjects. And I find that quite exciting. And that rather than putting your hand up and saying, which I think is really, really important for people to be able to tell their own stories and say, this is what happened to me. If you're able, by filling out a questionnaire, to speak with 20,000 other people and say, here is a pattern of an abuse of power, here is a pattern of marginalized people not being given access to resources, that's really powerful. You get to speak as one. I kind of think that's data journalism when it's at its best.
Yeah. Well, that is a beautiful note to end on. Thank you so much for your time, Mona, today. It was awesome talking to you.
Technologists are always testing. Red, green, refactor. So why shouldn't learning be like that too? Pluralsight Skills is where technology teams learn, practice, and apply new skills. With our hands-on learning experiences, you and your team can feel confident you're ready to tackle any project. Here's how it works. Build your foundational knowledge by learning from thousands of courses curated by industry experts. And with skill assessments and learning checks, you'll see if what you're learning is sticking, or if you need to spend more time on certain topics. Once you and your team have grasped key concepts, it's time to put new skills to the test in a pre-configured, risk-free environment. That means no time-consuming setups and no fear of making mistakes in your organization's systems. With labs, you can practice your skills by completing tasks with guided instruction, so you know exactly how to deliver on projects tech teams work on every day. With sandboxes, you can test your skills in real-world environments. And with no limitations to what you can explore, you can practice completing tasks just like the ones you'll be tackling on the job. After practicing new concepts using labs and sandboxes, you and your team are ready to apply what you've learned in real scenarios. Projects lets you take what you know and build applications in your own code editor. With guidance on how to set things up right, and with the ability to check your code for errors, you can troubleshoot and get the kinks out, leaving you and your team feeling confident you're ready to bring your new skills to work. There's never been a better way to turn knowledge into real job-ready skills, so you can solve problems and build awesome experiences faster. Build better with Pluralsight.
So we're back from Tech Skills Day, and it's been a great day so far. Welcome back, Cassidy. What have been some of the highlights of the show so far for you?
Oh, it has been so fun. I mean, I just talked to LeVar Burton.
I know.
That is not just a highlight of the day of the show. That's a highlight of the year so far. I don't know if you had talked to 8-year-old me and told her that I'd be talking to the Reading Rainbow guy, that would She would not believe you. It was really exciting.
Yeah, that's so amazing. So some of the highlights for me was I love talking with Scott about gatekeeping and extending your privilege, which is something that kind of hits home as I enter my third decade in tech. And then I loved speaking with Deborah Kurata, who is so passionate about teaching and has just such a great way of explaining things. It's been really fun. And both of those people were instrumental in inspiring me to become a Pluralsight author. So it was
Oh,
great.
that's so cool. Yeah, I also got to speak with Mona Chalabi, and she was inspiring to listen to because she does such cool data journalism, but also art, and combining those together is such a cool career and such a cool way to kind of differentiate yourself, but also get really good information out there.
Yeah, absolutely. So while I have you here, Cassidy, on Pluralsight's Upskilling AMA, you mentioned that you have a difficult time learning a new skill unless you've built something, like you have to build something with it. When you're learning a new skill, what steps do you take to make sure that you're really going to learn that skill?
Yeah, and so I am very much a hands-on person. I love being able to build something and be just like, okay, here's how it works. Here's what the underbelly of it looks like. Here's what it looks like at a high level. And so I tend to start with some kind of videos, maybe reading documentation and stuff, but I don't fully learn it until I use it. And then after using it, I tend to run into certain bugs and everything. And whenever you run into a bug, that is a great learning moment to see, okay, I understand how this works. I understand what went wrong. Now I can move on to the next thing. And being able to understand the nuances of that, I think, is super key for just understanding a technology or anything that you're learning in general. And so, yeah, that's my general approach: consuming the media, but then actually applying it.
Yeah, absolutely. What kind of projects do you build generally if you're trying to learn something new or a new feature? I mean, obviously you're not building like some giant enterprise application because nobody has the time for that. But do you have any suggestions of like small projects that you put together or small things that you build?
Yeah, and so a lot of my projects, what I do is I always write everything down. I have both a physical notebook and a digital notebook. Whenever I have a project idea, I write it down because even though I might not have time to build it, I mean, again, we don't always have the time for everything. I write it down somewhere so that when it's time for me to build, I have an idea that I can just pull from my idea jar and be able to start building it. And so sometimes my projects are very, very simple, like if I'm learning a new language, it might be just generate Fibonacci numbers. And if I'm learning a new framework, it might be a to-do list. So usually some of those basic things. But then beyond that, I try to think, okay, how can I make this more complex? How can I pull from a database? How can I add authentication? How can I figure out what's the best way for this to scale? Where would this break? And sometimes those projects are very silly. Like I've made a choose your own adventure story. I've made a prank website, things like that. But then sometimes they're a bit more robust where it's like building a template for nonprofits to use, that kind of thing.
Oh, awesome. Yeah, it sounds like applying it is always the best way, I think, for most people to get what they want done.
Yeah.
What are some mishaps that developers may face if they're not able to practice those skills?
If you're not able to practice those skills, I would say try to make time for them, because if you don't practice them, if you just learn from reading a tutorial or watching a video, watching a class, watching something, if you're just consuming but you're not actually outputting and trying it, you kind of understand how things should work in a bubble and on a theoretical level. And it's good to understand those things. It's good to be able to witness those things and see how it should work in an ideal world. But when you actually use it, you will make mistakes. And when you actually use it, things will break. And that's the nature of the beast. That's what programming is. And so applying things with your hands, applying things and actually doing it with your brain, with your thoughts, and figuring out how you want to add your own little creative twist on it, that's when you know how to use something. And sometimes I follow tutorials just completely to the book and I don't veer off at all. And I'm just like, okay, I saw how they built it. But then it's not until I customize it a little bit and see, okay, where's the flexibility here? Can I change this? Can I change that? That's when I start to really, really learn it. And you want to be able to get creative with the code. You want to be able to understand a technology, not just in an ideal world in that bubble, like I mentioned. You want to be able to understand it in a variety of use cases, and you can only really do that when you actually use it.
Absolutely. And there's a little bit of a muscle memory component, I think, to that too. Would you agree with that? Like, I could watch a bunch of videos and read books about wood carving, but if I don't actually grab the tool and put it to wood, it's kind of hard to understand. And I think coding is the same way.
Yeah, theoretically, I'm an amazing wood carver because I know all the techniques from watching videos, but I've never actually tried it. So I'll
Yeah,
just go with
exactly.
that.
Could you provide us an example of a time that you were trying to build a new skill for your position at Netlify and how you went about building that skill?
Yeah, and so when I joined Netlify, I came in to be kind of a React specialist, and I've been using React for many years, so I kind of really know the ins and outs. I've taught React. I've given in-person and online workshops. I'm really into React, and then they said, "Hey, we love your React, but we'd love you to focus a little bit on Next.js, which is a React framework." And so I had to learn Next, and I had touched on it before just from helping maintain previous projects and some open source things, but I hadn't really gone deep in Next.js and everything. And so when I had to learn it, it was kind of like what I mentioned before. I started reading the docs, I started watching videos. I wanted to make sure I understood some nuances, but I didn't fully learn it until I built some things with it. And I tried to figure out, okay, what are the limitations of it? What parts of it do I like? What parts of it can I speak to? But also what parts of it don't I like? And being able to see the pros and cons of a technology, I think gives you a lot of credibility, because if you're just like, this technology will solve every problem, chances are you're not that experienced with that technology. You want to be able to know the pros and cons of everything, because there are pros and cons to everything. You have to be discerning, which is something that I talked about with LeVar the other day. It's all about really understanding pros, cons, why something's good, why something's bad, and how you can kind of manipulate it in a way to work for you, how you can work around it, how you can work with it, and that just comes with practice.
Yeah, absolutely. That's usually what I think when I see a video or a talk where somebody's just kind of gushing over a new language or framework, and they're like, "This is amazing and this is great." And in the back of my head, I'm always thinking, "Okay, where's the not great stuff? Like,
where's the
I know
cynical
it's there.
nature?" Yeah.
Yeah, like, I know it's there, but
Yeah, because there have been times, for example, where I did a live stream using Vue a couple months ago, and it was my first time ever really playing with Vue. I had done a little bit here and there, but I hadn't built something with it. And again, I did a to-do list just to see what it was like. And there were little parts where I was gushing, where I was just like, "This is amazing," because of the way it handles indices and how it tracks certain variables and stuff. I thought that was very cool. But there were also parts where I was like, "I don't like this. I don't know about this." And I think it's good to have room for both. You should gush over things because you want to encourage people and get them excited about something, but you got to be honest with, again, pros and cons.
yes, absolutely. So Cassidy, you're passionate about making STEM more inclusive. How do you think hands-on learning is helping that mission?
I think it's all about the accessibility of hands-on learning, because right now there's so many resources out there to be able to pick something up and try it, where back when I was learning way too long ago, I just didn't have that ability to say, like, I'm going to learn Python. I had no idea what I needed to learn at that point. And if I wanted to learn HTML and CSS, I had to view the source of a website and kind of just try as I went. Until Neopets came out, and that was a game changer. But anyway, having the accessibility and the discoverability of learning tools that allow you to do that kind of hands-on learning is so important, and it's really just a game changer for learners all over the world, and it's really exciting to see the industry trend that way.
Absolutely. So why should creating an inclusive learning environment be important to technology leaders and technologists?
If you don't have an inclusive learning environment, you don't have an inclusive industry. And if you don't have an inclusive industry, you don't have inclusive products. And if you want your products to be made for everyone, they need to be made by everyone. And you need to have a lot of diverse backgrounds, people who are excited about different technologies to be able to make products that are for a diverse audience, for people who are diverse about the products that they are consuming. And that's something that I think a lot of technology leaders are understanding more and more now today than ever. And it's something that we need to keep pushing for and need to be deliberate about, because when you have a diverse team, you make better products. And if you make better products, your consumers are happy, your companies are happy, everyone's happy. And that's really the most important thing. And having an inclusive start, not only to your teams and everything, but also inclusive learning, where you can have a variety of ways to teach something, and you can have a variety of teachers teaching something. You never know who will resonate with whom. You never know who could learn best from a certain person or from a certain tutorial, certain video. And so I think not just hands-on learning, but also hands-on teaching, and getting everybody kind of giving back to each other, learning from each other and teaching each other, I think is really key to making this industry grow and change in the right direction.
Yes, I couldn't agree more. Well, thank you for sitting down and talking with me.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. This was fun.
So I had a conversation the other day with Troy Hunt, security expert, Pluralsight author, and he runs haveibeenpwned.com. And we talk about security in 2021. Hello and welcome to Tech Skills Day. Today I'm talking with Troy Hunt. How are you doing today, Troy?
Yeah, hey, Jeremy, I'm good, mate.
Awesome. So of course, if I'm sitting here talking to Troy Hunt, I'm going to talk about security. But there's one other thing that I wanted to ask you about before that, and that's a new hobby that you've gotten into, 3D printing. What can you tell us about that? How did that come up?
This wasn't staged. I was literally just amusing myself with this little clip. Well, it all started when I was drinking beer one day.
As most good things do, right?
The beginning of all good stories. So I'd had a big sort of round Australia trip over Christmas, and I ended it with a childhood friend of mine down in South Australia, and he's a maths teacher, and he had a 3D printer, and I'd sort of seen him before, but over, I forget how many beers, let's say some, he was showing me how the whole thing works. I was like, this is really, really cool. Why don't you just help me order one of these? And yeah, like I'll worry about it later on. So that's how it began. And then I've just been doing absolutely nothing useful whatsoever with it, other than teaching the kids about a whole bunch of interesting things like geometry and stuff like that. So I'm getting a lot of fun out of it, and it's consuming a lot of my time.
Awesome. So how long did it take you? I followed that trip on Twitter. How long did it take you to drive all the way up the continent like that? Like overall?
Well, the up wasn't the hardest bit. It's the in that's the hard bit. So for folks listening to this, Australia is a fraction smaller than the USA, or a very similar sort of size to continental Europe. But there's just like nothing in the middle. Everything is just around the edges, and mostly just around the eastern edge. So we drove all the way up to Cairns, which is up into the tropics there. And then ended up driving into the middle of the desert into Ayers Rock, which we now call Uluru, and that was really cool. And then we drove all the way down to the bottom and bought a 3D printer. It was about 4 weeks in total, with lots of breaks. And we had like 10 days in Port Douglas, so we had lots of breaks.
So I have to ask, as a security-minded professional, how did you feel about sharing your GPS through that entire trip?
Well, I mean, all I was doing is just posting geocoded photos. So I think there's a discussion here that's less privacy, or less rather security, and more about privacy, which is how do people feel about sharing things about themselves. So I shared not just where I was, but there are some photos of my kids and some of my fiance and things like that. So I guess for me, it's just a matter of making a conscious decision about what I wish to share. Yeah.
Absolutely. So what is everybody talking about this week in the security world?
It's Facebook. It's all, well, actually it was all ubiquity, and then Facebook happened and everyone's just like, ubiquity what? Suddenly everything changed. So I'm like looking at my dashboard now. I've had nearly 3 million people to have been pwned in the last 24 hours, which is about probably about 15 times plus over the normal traffic. And I'm literally looking at screens, just parsing phone numbers to make phone numbers searchable, and have I been pwned? Probably sometime today, because apparently this breach is 533 million phone numbers.
Wow. Yeah, that's what I'd read. So is it a big deal to have phone numbers revealed? Like storing them in a database? I noticed there was some chatter back and forth on Twitter about that. Should people be hosting this sort of thing? Is that something that that you think should be stored carefully by professionals, or should the attitude be, well, it's already out there everywhere anyway? I mean, a quick Google search, I found it relatively quickly, and I'm not a security researcher, so.
Well, there's lots of questions there. Should it be stored carefully? Yeah, yes, don't store it not carefully. That's not a good way to store it. So yes, it should be stored carefully. I think what we got to look at with the phone numbers, there's always a lot of hyperbole around these stories, and don't get me wrong, like, it's a big story, no doubt, but we've got to kind of separate the headlines from the actual risk. And in this case, we've got 533 million records. Now I've got to verify this myself. Part of the problem is there's multiple data sets. So I got given data weeks ago before this whole thing blew up, and it was 370 million records. And now the headlines are 533 million records, and there's two different corpuses, and they're a little bit different. So that bit's confusing. But then we've got to sort of look at it and go, all right, what's the risk here? Well, 533 million phone numbers. Some people are saying, well, yeah, the problem now is people get SIM hijacked, and then all their 2FA and everything will go out the window. Well, no, because that's a very, very targeted attack, and SIM hijacking happens, but it's also, compared to something like credential stuffing, high overhead. There was a good story recently from Joseph Cox, who was talking about he spent $14 or rather someone else with his permission spent $14 and got his text messages. Try spending $14 533 million times. You know, like, that is a big barrier to entry. So I'm not too worried about that. I think what's more interesting is the opportunity for spam and phishing, because you've got this massive mail merge list here, 533 million, not just phone numbers, but broken down by country and with names, and in some cases, other attributes like the location within the country and the birth date. So that is a really, really useful resource for being able to spam or phish large volumes of people.
Yeah, absolutely. So should we just, as a society, kind of accept the fact that our data is going to be compromised and not really be as worried about it? Because one of the things that came up is, you know, there's a certain set of folks that are like, I'm not on Facebook, I'm not on any social media, but they ended up in this also because they're in contact lists, and people's contact lists were brought in. So it almost seems inevitable towards something. Would you agree with that, or we just should probably accept that our data is going to be out there and try to deal with it any way we can?
Look, I'm not particularly fond of that term, simply because by saying accept it, it's almost like saying there is nothing that we can do about this. And in reality, there are things that we can do, if not to stop the incident from happening in the first place, but at least to lessen the damage. Now, for reasons unbeknownst to me, my data is not actually in there. There are 7.3 million records in the Australia one, which is interesting because we've got like 25 million people in the country. So that must be a substantial percentage of the Facebook users. Don't know why my data's not in there. But if it's in there, and my phone number's there, and my name, for example, you know, like, what can I do? Do I just accept it and go, well, I'll go about my daily business? Or do I recognize that I'm going to be at a heightened risk of phishing attacks, and I need to be a bit more conscious of spam and things like that? And I think this is more where the money is, if you like, so where we need to be thinking. You know, we can't stop these incidents from happening, but we can lessen the damage by, for example, not overly sharing. I often sign up for websites and it will say, what's your date of birth? So you don't need that. All I want to do is like comment on cats. I don't need to give you my date of birth. If I don't use that and hand it over in that location, well, then that's just one less place that can later on expose it. So we can make these decisions and still use services. I don't frankly like the premise of delete Facebook, simply because now more than ever, this is how you socialize, right? Like, this is where my friends are. I've never deleted Facebook because I like seeing my friends who've had babies or are doing other things in other parts of the world. I'm not going to take that away. I'm just not going to click on stupid links if I get spam or phishing attacks.
Yeah, that's quotable right there. So what responsibility do companies have to alert people that this data has been breached? You know, what kind of responsibility, in your opinion, should they have as far as contacting people or making it public?
Yeah, well, this is really interesting because Facebook is probably falling a little bit short of what we would expect. I mentioned ubiquity before as well. I don't know if we'll touch on that, but that's another example of falling short.
Yeah.
I think we can break this down into two categories. So one is regulatory responsibility and other is good corporate citizen responsibility. Now, the former is in some ways a little bit easier because there's clear guidelines and it's enforceable. In some ways, it's harder because it's different all over the world. And the protections that I get as an Australian are vastly different to the protections that, say, someone in Germany gets, even though, for the most part, we're the same kind of people doing stuff online. I think the latter point about good corporate citizen is probably more relevant in terms of what should we expect as an industry. And the first thing is that we expect expeditious disclosure. So when an incident happens, we want to know about it soon. We don't want to know about it many, many weeks later, preferably even not many, many days later. And then the other point, and this is one that I've been making a lot in response to this Facebook situation, is I'm of the view that, let's say in this case, there's data floating around. It's clearly come from Facebook. Facebook should provide a facility by which people can gain access to the data, which is now in the public domain. So it shouldn't be up to like one person in their home office building Have I Been Pwned for people to go and search for their exposure. Like this should be done by Facebook. They're big, they've got lots of money, smart people. Like they could whip this up in an afternoon, right? Like this is not a hard problem for them to solve. And I believe the onus should be on them.
Yeah, and speaking of Have I Been Pwned, and I'm a huge fan of the site. I go there quite a bit. Do you ever worry about putting that information on your site, whether you're liable in any way? You know, if you go out to these groups and get this data that's been breached, and I know that you don't just expose it, you know, you don't just list it like a big spreadsheet, of course, but do you ever worry about somebody coming to you and saying, hey, you know, this data is on your server and we don't like it?
It's an interesting question because we're sort of living in this space where, strictly speaking, the idea of having all of this personal identifiable data without any sort of informed consent or things like that is not what we want to happen. And as an industry, we want to regulate against this sort of use. I mean, this is one of the big things with GDPR, right? And that is a fine objective. That the problem that we've got, of course, is that hackers don't really like following those guidelines. so they get data all over the place. Man, this Facebook data is spread so broadly, like it's all over Twitter. There's torrents everywhere. It's just, it's like you're never putting that genie back in the bottle. So I think the question that we then have to ask is, given that this is now an immutable event and we can't cleanse the internet of the data, what is the best possible thing we can do? And Have I Been Pwned is my version of the best possible thing that I think we can do. Other people have other versions. Some of them, to my view, are way too liberal. Other views of, well, it just shouldn't be there at all, I don't think makes sense because, in my view, people deserve to know if they've been pwned somewhere. That's the whole MO. And for me, I look at Have I Been Pwned of what's the best way of answering that question, have I been pwned, whilst not introducing unnecessary risk to individuals. Now, so far, touch wood, no one has tried to throw the book at me legally or from a regulatory perspective. I'm doing a lot of work with a lot of governments and law enforcement agencies. I hope that puts me in good stead if ever something unpleasant happens. But look, I mean, all I can do is what I think makes sense at the time. And we just do not have good regulatory frameworks around at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. So you mentioned the Ubiquity incident, and they're probably very thankful right now that the Facebook thing happened to get a little bit of the spotlight off of them, right?
I hadn't thought about that.
What can you tell us about that and what you've learned in the last few weeks?
I'm so sad about that because I so love Ubiquity. So I, probably about 4 or 5 years ago, I replaced my networking gear at home, which was very sort of mainstream consumer grade rubbish that I wasn't happy with. And I went out on Twitter and I was like, all right, what's the good networking gear that people are using these days? And a bunch of people said, oh, go and get Ubiquity because it's sort of prosumer. And you end up with a bunch of wireless access points around your house. I've got a wide backbone Ethernet and a switch downstairs, so it made a lot of sense. I got this and I wrote about it, and I spent thousands of dollars of my own money too. Like, this was a serious investment, but it's like, look, I work from home. This makes sense. And I wrote about it, and people loved it, and Ubiquity loved it. And they started sending me lots of stuff. And I love it when they do that. So I built out more and more stuff. And I wrote lots of blog posts and so on, and put it in a bunch of friends' homes. So I was very, very invested. I did some tutorials for them as well. And that was great. And then in January this year, they sent a disclosure notice, a breach disclosure notice. And as soon as I got it, I was like, is this real? Like, literally the first line. I was looking at it again today. It wasn't even the first sentence. Like, the sentence hadn't even completed. The first line had a typo in it, which is sort of going, has anyone read this? And then it was just very, very vague. Some stuff happened, maybe change your password, third party, yada, yada, yada. And I got in touch with my contact at Ubiquity that was sending me the gear. And I was just like, is this real? And he said, yeah, that's real. So, all right, well, can I help you do better at communicating this? And I talk to a lot of organizations. I don't make any money from it, but I just think it's a really interesting thing to get them to actually formulate their messages better. And basically they weren't in a position where they wanted to accept any help. And then we fast forward a couple of months, and Brian Krebs writes his piece only a few days before recording now, which is referring to the Ubiquity breach as a catastrophic, based on the feedback from an insider. And there's some really serious claims in there, everything from a ransom through to an insider with privileged knowledge, insufficient logging, potential complete takeover of people's networks. Very, very disastrous sort of stuff. And Ubiquity came out with a response which was equally terrible to the previous notice, and really didn't deny any of the things that was said, but also didn't explicitly confirm them, which I think in itself is a little bit telling. And again, I had the same discussion with Ubiquity folks. Yeah, I love what you do. Let me help you do this properly, because this is just atrociously bad. So look, I think to your point, Facebook has sort of stolen the spotlight at the moment, data breach wise. But look, I'm honestly sitting here going, do I want to accept any more free stuff or give them any sort of implicit promotion, because I'm just very, very unhappy with the way they've dealt with this. Yeah,
could imagine. So you mentioned these devices, and I know you have a few IoT devices around the house. I've got plenty of them. The lights that are shining on me right now are connected to my network for some reason. And so what do you think about, because I can, exactly. Same reason my washing machine's connected. So I haven't got the wash machine yet, but on my next upgrade, I'm fairly certain it will also connect to my network for whatever reason. Is that something that we should be cautious about? Or, I don't want to say scared, that we should be scared of it, but should we at least be cautious of these devices and how ubiquitous they are as they're coming out everywhere, and we just plug them in? I mean, I've done it myself, just where I get the cool thing. I'm like, oh, it's network connected. I'll just plug it in. Cool. Yeah. I don't think. I think we've got to sort of look at it and say, okay, well, what's the value proposition of connecting it? So is it worth connecting? And then how are we going to minimize any risk as a result of this? So look, I was joking about the washing machine thing. My washing machine is connected. It's a Samsung washing machine. There is actually a value to that, which is that you can get alerts and things, say, when it's finished. So I've now got mine plugged into Home Assistant, and it plugs in via a Samsung SmartThings integration. So now when the washing machine finishes, like myself and my partner, we get an alert on our watch, and then the Sonos downstairs speaks, says the washing machine just finished. So it's away in a laundry where we can't hear it. So we don't necessarily hear the beeps and things like that. So this is actually a cool thing, because then you can go, the washing machine just finished. Now I can go and put the washing on the line. So there is actually a value to it. And then in terms of the risk mitigation, this is where it's a little bit harder, because the question really is like, what happens if someone pwns my washing machine? And the risk is greater than just, look, they're going to well, I guess they're not going to put the colors in with the white. So that would be quite a feat if you could do that. They might change the temperature, which I know my wife gets upset when I do that. So the wrong wash cycle, something like that. Yeah, obviously there's risks with the device itself, but
but I think the risk that I'm a little bit more conscious of, and this is something we learned with things like the Mirai botnet, is that this is a computer in your home that might run arbitrary code and might do other things within a privileged environment that you do not expect it to. And there's a couple of things here. I mean, one is to VLAN away all your IoT things. I have all my IoT things on a separate SSID, which is easy to do with Ubiquiti, by the way. So one of the reasons I like, I'm still deciding the product. So putting things on a separate SSID, I can then VLAN them away. The problem is you start going down this rabbit hole of, okay, I could VLAN stuff away, but sometimes your IoT network might actually want to talk to your primary network. So let's say I put like my phones, my computers, and the high trust devices on the primary network, and then I put the IoT stuff on the other network. I've had a lot of trouble with things like Sonos. Like Sonos wants to be able to, as an IoT device, talk to the mobile app that's running on your phone. So if they're on different networks, unless you start getting really kludgy sort of firewall rules, it's like, okay, well, this device can communicate over this port and this oh my God, it's just going to be a nightmare to maintain.
Yeah.
I think that the much more practical thing is to apply this sort of zero trust principle that we've been getting so much in the enterprise of, rather than just say everything behind the corporate firewall is good and all the stuff on the outside is bad, let's just go everything everywhere is bad. And we work on that assumption.
Yeah.
So we don't leave things on the network with open file shares that any other device can access, even if you think it's only going to be your own devices. And then if something does go rogue internally, you're better protected. I think the thing that gets really interesting is stuff around things like service packs and patches. So security fixes. Like how do you update your toaster? Have you thought through, this process?
Good
Very
question.
possibly not. Is it automated? Is it manual? I think that's a really interesting opportunity. I'd love to see a company come along and do like IoT orchestration platform, where it's like, okay, this product will manage all of the things in your network. It will look at the firmware on everyone. It will tell you when there's an update, and it'll either push it out or send you an alert or something like that. I think there's an opportunity there.
Yeah, absolutely. So what are some things that us as security professionals, leaders, developers, whoever, what are some things that they should look at when a company has a major breach and they're possibly affected? Is there like just 2 or 3 things that you should start with on day 0 when you find out about it?
Yeah, look, I mean, there's a lot of really sort of formal incident response sort of guidelines out there, but it boils down to things like obviously filling whatever hole it is that was compromised. Let's say it's the Facebook situation, and allegedly they're on top of this already, but obviously figure out how it happened and make sure that can't happen anymore. Establishing the extent of the damage is another thing, like how much data is out there, what is the impact, and then obviously the communication strategy around it. And this is, again, what has not really happened in Facebook and hasn't happened very well with Ubiquiti. So how do we actually do disclosure messaging to people? Yeah, and this is one of the things that I'm really passionate about, because there are organizations out there that have done it really, really well. Yeah, little stuff like, here's what actually happened. We are sorry it happened. Compared to, let's say, what you often see, and it's not just Ubiquiti or Facebook, where it'll be lawyer speak, sophisticated nation state actor, dog ate my homework, and then, just sort of misdirection. Everybody's getting hacked. This is what I see a lot these days. It effectively boils down to everybody else is getting hacked these days, so like maybe it's not so bad. I feel like it's talking to my children, where you say, if you do something wrong and you've made a mistake, you got to own up to it and take responsibility for it. Like good little networking company, do that.
Yeah, absolutely. So what are some of the things that you see as rising threats coming down the pipe, like this year, especially with the drastic work from home change, of course, and things like that? What are you seeing as some of the rising threats that maybe weren't so important before, but you're seeing a lot more of now?
I think there's sort of some stuff is happening due to COVID, which is that we've got everyone at home increasingly using services which might be what we classify as shadow IT, so outside the formal construct of the IT department. I remember back in the day, shadow IT was, like Bob from marketing has stood up an Access database, and it's like, oh, not Bob again, not Access again, and that was the worry. These days, it's like Bob from marketing has spun up an S3 bucket in AWS, and he's put all the sales data in there, and it's publicly accessible.
Much more complex.
Yeah, it's just gotten much worse there. So I think that sort of shadow IT thing is something that has been exacerbated a lot by COVID because people have had to find solutions. And it's not that Bob's a bad guy. He's just trying to get his job done and he's using the technology at his disposal. This year, we've seen a lot of big nation state headlines already with SolarWinds and then the exchange situation as well. So we know that that's going to be massive moving forward because there's just so much more stuff of value out there. And it does make you wonder, looking at how far back SolarWinds went, like how, I was going to use a nationality here, but we'll try and be a little bit more generic. How many people of certain countries, including you guys, Americans are all up in lots of stuff too. Not so much us, we don't have as much money. But how many nation states are in different things right at the moment, having compromised software that we just haven't even learned of? And, you know, like the 2022 headline will be, you wouldn't believe what happened, you know, last year. So that'll be interesting. And then, of course, the IoT thing, which we've just been discussing, and what's making that particularly exciting is the fact that it is so cheap to put internet in any device. I got some light bulbs from the hardware store a couple of weeks ago because they were just so cheap. And this is, if I was to put it in USD, they were probably like $14 or something for an RGB LED light bulb with a normal sort of thread on it that I can just stick in anywhere. And now it's got an IP address. It's in my home. So that is fascinating. And it's like equal parts exciting and scary that we can do that at that price.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you very much for joining me for this. Do you have any parting thoughts or anything for our technologists out there?
Look, I just think this is a fascinating industry, and it's massively understaffed as well. It's something that anyone with, particularly anyone with a technical background, but really there's a lot of people in InfoSec from all sorts of different backgrounds, but it's something that most people can pivot into fairly easily if you are a developer, an IT pro, or something like that. And it is just a fascinating, exciting industry, and it just generally makes me excited every morning to get up and see what's going to be in my inbox.
Yeah, awesome. Well, thank you very much.
No worries. Thank you for having me.
Well, hello, everybody. Welcome back. Now we're going to be talking with John Papa, who's a principal cloud advocate at Microsoft, a big Disney fan, and I am very, very excited to meet with you and hang out with you today, John.
That's going to be a lot of fun. It's the first time we've actually got to talk live on air anywhere together.
Yeah, I feel like we've been ships passing in the night a lot on the internet, but it's good to actually get to talk to you. Well, because I know that you are a Disney fan and we want to hit hard-hitting questions today, you used to work for Disney, which is so cool, and I feel like is like every Disney nerd's dream. With all the new releases this year and everything, again, first hard-hitting question, what's your favorite Disney movie?
Oh, there's so many, but I have to go with an all-time classic for me. There's two that stand out. One is Mary Poppins, the original. I grew up with it, and it meant a lot to me growing up to be able to watch that movie. And the songs, I still sing them, I have to admit.
They're great songs.
That's a big piece. And then more modern one is Tangled. I absolutely love the Tangled movie, the animation, the music.
The music is so, I love singing the music of Tangled. Oh, so good. The modern ones have had such catchy music between Tangled and Frozen and Moana. I just want to sing them all the time.
Yes. And then the newest one that came out was Raya. It doesn't have as much music in it, but the movie is amazing. It's really good.
That's in my queue. I'm really excited to see that one. That's so fun. Okay, well, I'm glad that we got that out of the way. So now we can answer the less important ones. But you have been on a lot of webinars and panels about the state of the web, and I am a web developer myself. I love seeing where everything is going. What is really exciting for you to see in the advancement of the web, of JavaScript, HTML, CSS? What are some of the most exciting parts of that for you?
There's a lot that's exciting these days. And quite frankly, I think that's the best place to start is there's a lot. And I don't think anybody should feel overwhelmed in how much is coming at them all the time with the technology. One of the first things I like to share with folks is that there's so much coming at you all the time. It's good to think about what you don't need to focus on.
Yes,
first.
Totally.
A lot of distractions. It's like distractions in your life. And for me, I like to look forward to things that are moving the web forward, not bleeding edge, but leading edge, I would say. So right now, the thing that's really got me going is Svelte. Very excited about where Svelte's heading, things that it's doing. It's actually taking advantage of, is it Vite? Is that how you pronounce Vite?
Yeah, it's French. I thought it was Vite for the longest time.
I did too. But it's taking advantage of that, and it's moving forward with TypeScript. And what's really cool is it's still being true to itself, which is it is very small, tiny, and fast, and it's so easy to use. So I feel like it's a really good evolution of where the web is heading towards.
I'm very excited about Svelte myself too, because I'm a React developer. I love diving into React, but there are a lot of places where it feels very bloated, and then you see something like Svelte or something like Eleventy even, where it's smaller but it gets the job done. You're just like, ooh, that's nice and clean. And you
And
can
isn't
kind
that
of
part of the nature of all this is like things like Angular and React, they've been around for many years now. As time goes on, they do add more to it because people want it. But then at the same time, people then say, well, yeah, I wanted all that, but now it's too heavy. I'll go to something else.
yeah. It's maintaining that fine balance, and it definitely like ebbs and flows as the web grows and changes. Do you see a lot of changes to JavaScript in particular? Do you see a lot of changes coming to the language that you're excited about, whether it's in the TC39 proposals or anything that you're just like, ooh, this could be a game changer?
I don't see any game changers. There's a lot of little things that have come out or being used. One of the things I really like is I think of TypeScript almost, in my personal opinion, as an incubator for JavaScript in a lot of ways. There's a lot of cool features that land there that end up later on in JavaScript and things that were in other languages. I don't know the official name of it. I think it's the chaining, optional chaining.
Optional chaining, so good. I love optional chaining.
Right?
Yeah, it's so simple but so great.
It is. It avoids all that guard logic of if customer and customer.address and customer.address. Oh my gosh. It's like,
just my line lengths shrunk, and it's so nice to see that.
And the big secret nobody likes to talk about is that the less code you write, the less code can break.
That's very true.
I do like shorter, more readable code.
Yeah, for sure. Some of those new changes myself, optional chaining, even just like the piping operator seems very interesting. It feels very functional programming like, which I haven't touched since my computer science college days, but it's exciting to see that kind of stuff coming to the web. Sure is. Yeah. And so we're in a pandemic, hence why we're doing this virtually. But because of the pandemic, because of COVID, it's really impacted how we do absolutely everything. Would you say it's changed software development for the better, or kept it the same? How would you say things have changed in software development land?
I cringe to say anything's changed for the better due to this pandemic. Let's say it's changed for sure. I'm a glass half full kind of person. I like the positive outlooks. I've been working remotely for years, but one of the nice things that I've seen is it's always been difficult working remotely at times. Just when you think that you're part of a team and your things are going smoothly, sometimes working remotely, you'll hit these walls. For example, people will schedule meetings, especially in other time zones, when you're at family time or you're sleeping or so I think the world has become much more attuned to, we can actually make this work. We can have remote workers and do it through Zoom, Teams, whatever, and make it a functional, productive meeting. But one of the biggest things I think has really changed with it is when you're not all in one place, the need for automation becomes even more clear. So things like DevOps are critically important during this time because there's a lot of companies out there still, I worked at several, where you require somebody to reboot the server underneath their desk. It's an whole desktop running some critical tier 1 application. And during the pandemic, I think we've realized that a lot of that stuff, it's kind of pushed it to the forefront and said, we really need this to change. And then the second thing I think is more of a customer experience. How many pieces of technology seem to have really pushed to the forefront in this last year? The most obvious of which I think is telemedicine. Like telehealth. I mean, you don't have to leave your house anymore and drive to a doctor and wait for an hour and a half in the waiting room. And now you can Zoom them or use whatever technology.
Yeah, I think that's huge. And also just like IT type of things in general, like security and figuring out how you want to, for example, handle VPNs and keys and everything for that sort of thing. Even like you don't necessarily need a desk phone budget anymore for a lot of the older, bigger companies, but you might need a home Wi-Fi budget. There's a lot of things like that where every aspect of companies has changed, tech companies and otherwise.
Certainly has. And who can say, does anybody actually miss the commute to work? I know I don't.
No.
I gained like an hour a day. So
Yeah.
it's great.
Yeah, I've also been working from home for a while. And I do think that working from home in a pandemic is very different from working from home otherwise, because normally I can go to a library or a cafe, I can see people after work and stuff. And so it is different, but I think it's here to stay. I don't see a lot of people going back.
No, I think the one thing I miss the most, honestly, is I used to work at a local coffee shop 4 or 5 days a week for no more than 3 or 4 hours.
Nice.
But I like the white noise. I like to see people. And it was just nice to do that. You know, you get your headphones in and I can do calls and work. But it was just nice to get out of the house. And it was a forcing function for me.
Right.
There were times during this pandemic where I didn't move. And it just wasn't good for me mentally or physically.
Yeah. No, one thing pre-pandemic working from home, I always had a routine for getting dressed in the morning, going to a specific area, all that stuff. And that's kind of gone out the window this past year. I am wearing a lot more comfy pants. But yeah, I do think we will definitely face a new normal in the future, but I'm cautiously optimistic about what that new normal is going to look like for sure.
Me too.
Yeah. So a lot of the people who are watching don't have the kind of experience that you have, whether it's working remotely or for a big company. And so I want to ask you kind of 2 questions about that. First of all, what has your kind of steps in your dev journey been, unconventional and conventional? And then which one of those would you do again? Which one of those do you think like this was not a mistake, this is definitely what I do, and this one, I probably shouldn't have done that?
Yeah, there were definitely several of both in my career. And I think I'd start with, before I even had a career, I was tinkering with computers through high school and whatnot. At the time, there wasn't an internet, there wasn't, the materials and resources and the communities that we have today. But it was still valuable because I was learning how to use these things. And what helped me with that was it helped me just realize that I wanted to do something with these because I could scratch my creative itch using them. So I do think that it's really good for everybody to at least get exposure to some kind of making it real, like a computer class in high school or middle school, just to see, not a whole career out of it, just see, is this something you're interested in or not? Because I bet a lot of people get into a career and probably didn't do any of that early on. And it's kind of nice to know kind of what our field is like a medical field in some ways, where you can say you're a doctor, but what you're a doctor of could be very different than what someone else is a doctor of. And what you do in computers could be very different, like DevOps versus IT admin versus software developer. So I think early on, getting some kind of a sense for what's out there is good. That helped me a lot. Some missteps along the way. I thought I had to become a manager early on in my career to be successful. I think a lot of people in technology feel that way. You get to a certain point. And I realized very quickly early on that I didn't really want to be a manager. I like the tech. I like solving problems. And it took me probably too long to figure out that I can lead by example or lead technology teams without being a formal manager. And that was just a path that at first I didn't understand existed. And it doesn't exist at every company, to be clear. But when you find a company that will let you basically grow into that. And my best advice there is, and I've been told this multiple times through my career, and it really rings true. If the position you want isn't at your company, go ahead and write up the job description that you want and work with your company to see if you can make that work. Now, obviously that means you got to have a company who's willing to listen and you're doing well where you are, but there's so much value in so much of what we all do. When you think about developer relations, this didn't really exist in this form, at least, 10, 15 years ago. It's really evolved out of other things. So if you can find a role that you think suits you, don't think the only path for you is software developer, manager, and that's it.
Yeah, I think that's so important, because I also made the same realization when I was just like, oh, you can be an individual contributor, you can be an IC and still be a leader in a company. You don't have to be the boss of people or anything to move up in your career. And I think that's a super common misconception, where so many times I see in webinars at events and things, people are asking, do I need to get a master's degree? Do I need to have this kind of management experience to be able to do well in my job? And you really don't. There's so many options in tech, especially today, more now than ever.
There really are. And one of the big things I really loved at working at Disney and Microsoft is both companies offered me the opportunity to figure out where's the best place we can take this person's skills and use it for the company and for that person. When you find something that somebody's passionate about and good at, and you marry it with a need in the company, it doesn't have to be a formal position that's just existed for 50 years. Right. So it's something it's hard to get to. And you don't have to be high level, or you don't have to be. Doesn't just apply to junior, senior, principal level people. It's really universal. It just takes a conversation with you and your leader.
Yeah. And so in your role at Microsoft, if you don't mind my asking, dev advocacy is relatively new. A lot of people don't know what it is. How would you describe your day-to-day at Microsoft doing this kind of advocacy work?
I'll tell you what I do day to day. And I'll also tell you that I've done this on and off for about 12 years. And every company, and even at Microsoft, it's changed. So how it works at Amazon, Google, Microsoft, Facebook, other companies, Netlify, it's not all the same in how you do this. Sometimes advocates or developer relations work under marketing. Sometimes they work under engineering teams. Sometimes they work under other teams. I've seen them under CFOs as well. So who your leadership is the first thing I'd look at, because that defines usually the direction and goal, what you're doing. For me, I prefer the engineering org because I'm more engineering focused. My role has always been at the center of a triangle of the community, the product team, and marketing. And the reason I say that is that the product drives everything. You have to both understand and translate the product in simple terms to the communities, the customers, and you also have to funnel the feedback back in from the customers to the product team. But there's also marketing needs as well to work on, when are the releases of these products, and how do we actually connect with the community in large masses for events and mailings and other kinds of things. So there's a lot going on between these different areas. And then the last piece of that's the triangle, is content creation. Mm-hmm. And content isn't just a blog post or a video or something like this. It's anything you create. It can also be open source. So I've got several open source projects that I use and contribute to. Everybody can do this differently. I actually worked up a list with Ashley McNamara at my team about a year ago on what is content. And I think between the two of us, we came up with a list of about 50 different kinds of things that you can do that we considered content. Because usually people think of content as something you write or physically can hand. But it's it's basically it's the communication vehicle between you and the community. And that's the important thing. It's usually the result of advocacy, the thing we create. And then the impact is people getting excited about the product, using it, channeling feedback. It's a lot of fun because you get to be very technical and you get to pull people in and talk to them.
Yeah, we have a phrase on our team where we say we want to use all the parts of the buffalo, where if we do work on something open source, that could turn into a blog post, and there could be a video on top of that, and we could do an event on top of that, and it's all about getting the communication to the developers in the way that they want to be met.
Yeah, and it's about understanding the developer too, right? That empathy role of who is your audience? We always hear about the events, like just go speak at a bunch of events. And while that is as part of what we do now online, less in person, due to the pandemic, the key with the event was never the talks. It was the stories you tell, motivating people. And then for me, I see people sometimes 5 years, 10 years later, and they tell me something that I shared with them a decade ago at some event somewhere or something I wrote. They're like, this changed how I looked at X. Thank you. And now this is what I'm doing with that. And I've evolved it to this. Or they say, I loved what you put together at an event. This is my favorite because I wrote this Angular style guide years ago. And I used to have people come up to me and say they loved it, but I didn't like this one thing. I just think it's totally wrong. So I changed it. And I hope you don't hate me for it, John. And I was always like, that's exactly what open source is for. And it's not to tell you how to do something. It's to open your mind to new possibilities. And maybe you liked a little bit of it, or you hated it so much that you created your own thing. So to me, that's really the crux of what we do, is really inspiring things to move forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And those kinds of interactions just bring so much joy too. You're like, I did my job and it's working. And I had the wildest interaction recently where I used to play the game Clash of Clans on the phone.
Yeah.
So silly little game. And I was in a clan called Programmers. And I used to give people advice and talk about open source in that group. And someone within the past month said, hey, we used to talk a lot on Clash of Clans about 7 years ago. You changed my career. And that kind of stuff, it's just, that's what it's all about. It's so cool to see that kind of stuff and getting developers to move forward, be the best that they can be, and make content, make code, make things to make the world a better place. It's empowering, and it's really, really exciting to be a part of that.
It really is. And I think the grassroots effort of reaching everybody is great, because these people, all of us, we grow into our roles and we become technology decision makers down the road. I always look at developer relations as the long game. There are short-term wins, but a lot of what we do is the long game on changing minds. Think about Microsoft, for example. 10 years ago, nobody back then thought open source and, TypeScript and VS Code and GitHub and all this stuff. It was just, no, not Microsoft, and things have changed.
Yeah, that's truly the most great example of it, because there's so many things that I use of Microsoft today where I'm like, man, I was very arrogant in the past, but they got some good stuff, and that's the job. It's changing minds like that.
It is.
Well, thank you so much, John, for your time today. It was awesome talking to you. I had a blast talking to you, and it's good to finally get to catch up and talk like this.
Yeah, it's great to catch up with you, and I hope everybody out there is, doing the best they can in these trying times, and keep your chin up.
Yeah. All right. Have a good one.
See ya.
Now, how fun is it to be able to talk to someone about Disney and tech? That was such a great conversation. Next up, we're going to be talking to April Spate, who's a senior cloud advocate at Microsoft. Well, hello, everybody, and welcome back. I am so excited to be talking with April Spate today. She is a senior cloud advocate at Microsoft. April, it's so good to see you again. I feel like I know you very well purely because I follow you on Twitter and we've talked on the internet, but it's nice to actually get to talk to you face to face.
Yes, definitely. Thank you very much, Cassidy. I'm happy to finally have a chance to sit down and have a conversation with you. How are you doing?
Oh, I am great. I'm very, very excited to ask you some hard-hitting questions today.
Looking forward to it.
Yeah. So first and foremost, I know this, not everybody knows this. You didn't take a very traditional path into tech. Would you mind telling us how you got to where you are today?
Yeah, no problem. So I started out in luxury fashion as a menswear stylist, as well as a visual merchandiser. But I realized that as much fun as that was, it wasn't going to necessarily be a good thing for me with regards to financial stability in the future. So I decided to take a look at what sort of skills I did have and what I could potentially transfer elsewhere. And so I had a certificate in business project management. So I said, all right, I'll become a project manager. Through my job search, I learned that at the time, a lot of the jobs that were available on the market required IT experience, which is not what I had. So I had to find a way to present the skills I did have and overlap with what was being asked of me. So having transferable skills made a big difference. I got a job as an intern. I was eventually given full-time employment, which was great. And then over time, I've been a project manager. When I got to Microsoft, I became a program manager. I was creating content for fun on the side, and I did it just for fun. But then I realized it would be even more fun if this was a full-time job. And so that's how I landed here in advocacy. But that also came with learning a whole new technology, which was spatial computing. So I've been doing that now for almost a year and a half now, and I wouldn't trade it for the world.
That is so awesome. And I feel like there's quite a few of us in the advocacy world where we discovered it and we're like, oh, this is a cool job. It's definitely a fast learning experience depending on the avenues you take with it, but it's such a cool job, and I'm glad you got to that spot too.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I love it here. I would say for me, what's always been most important is making sure that folks, A, know the technology, and B, they're getting the help that they need, and C, they're just aware of what's available. So what I love about advocacy is that unlike marketing, we're not there to sell. We're more so there to expose, bring awareness, and then to also help out. So it's great having that sort of role. Unlike when working in fashion, it's very sales oriented, and I did not like that at all. So it's good to not have to worry about that, I would say.
Yeah, for sure. It's a whole focus on just the developer's experience with a different technology or platform or thing. And it is very separate from marketing and from engineering, and yet it kind of intertwines the both in a cool way.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. But yeah, still get a chance actually to work with marketing and engineering. But to your point, that's not what we do. and I love that.
Yeah. So speaking of making all kinds of cool content, congratulations on publishing a book. You published your book, Bite-Sized Python, An Introduction to Python Programming. What has the response to the book been like? What is it like to see people have your book and experience it with this thing that you made?
Yeah, it's a very interesting feeling. And, you know, to this day, I have yet to actually see it in the bookstore. Everyone else approaches me and they take pictures too. And they're like, oh my gosh, I saw your book at Barnes and Noble. And I'm like, I'm the only person that hasn't seen it out in the wild. So hopefully I'll get a chance to go to Barnes and Noble soon to do that. But in general, it's been a really great feeling. I always just like to see myself as a resource. So knowing that I'm able to provide that help with people who want to get started with Python, and even though the book was more so written for children, I couldn't even tell you how many like adults have come to me and they found the book to be really helpful. Also, the amount of emails that I've gotten from people as well. So it's a really good feeling, I would say.
Yeah, and you learned so much by teaching too. Did you surprise yourself by learning as you were writing this together and describing things a certain way so that way it could be approachable by children and the adults that love it?
Yeah, I can definitely say I learned a lot. And I think when you are book writing, especially a technical book, you really have to humble yourself, and you realize that you don't know as much as you thought you knew. And that becomes really evident when you're working with the technical editor. So I chose my technical editor. It was someone that had critiqued my work in the past. And he also had done Python for years and have also authored books. And very glad to have him in my corner. Even now, with my second book that I've been writing, there's just been a lot more that I've had a chance to learn. But the good thing is now, if someone were to ask me something in the future, I'm like there to answer their questions. And with the second book focused on Visual Studio Code, whenever we have something going on internally that somehow ties into VS Code, I'm like, okay, I know the answer to that. I want to help out. Here's some more context. So
yeah, you learn it so deeply when you're trying to explain it to other people.
Yeah, it's good though, because like before, I was really just using VS Code to code, if you will. But there's so many features available. And for me, I've focused on just the ones that are more pertinent for Python developers. But there's so many different features within the editor that can really help streamline your process of coding, and also to focus more on the coding rather than just various other aspects of like the development process. But in any case, I love it. I will always promote VS Code every single day. But yeah, there's always a lot more to learn than what you think you know.
Totally. Okay, so let's talk about the Python angle of this then, because Python has managed to stay around and be popular for a pretty long time, especially with machine learning and everything, despite how relatively old it is. Why do you think it has stayed around so long? What do you think has contributed to the longevity of this language?
I think for Python, it's a very approachable language for someone that's getting started. And if I look at this from a beginner's perspective, what I've noticed is when folks are asking, what should I learn first? What should I learn first? And for me, whenever anyone asks me, it's always a matter of, okay, what do you have the most of like interest in? And it's like, do you want to work on how websites look, for example? Then take this path. But for folks who want to get their hands a little more, I don't want to say deeper in the weeds, because every language, if you will, has its like place in the development process. But for folks who want to do more so back end, that's where Python starts to come into play. And I think for the fact that it's not too, for me, it's not too like over my head with getting started. The fact that it is very approachable, I think, makes a big difference. And plus you can do a lot with Python as well. And, you know, as you may know, as you look at trying to do the same thing across different languages, some things are simpler to do in one language over others. And I found that to be the case with Python. So I think, especially from that getting started perspective, that's what keeps the spirit alive with Python. And that's why I personally continue to use it, because I just think things are done simpler in Python.
Yeah, I admit I've said a few times that I'm kind of jealous of developers today who are learning, because some of the stuff that they're able to learn with now, whether it's Python, JavaScript, any of these languages that have a lower barrier to entry, there's so many resources now. And it's amazing to be able to just see how fast people can learn and pick it up and run with it and get deep in the weeds, like you said.
Yeah, and when I wrote the first book in the acknowledgments, I believe it is, I started out by thanking all the content creators. And I even mentioned, to your point, that when I started out, there were not this many resources available. I didn't have the luxury of hopping on YouTube and finding tutorials for very like distinct things that I couldn't figure out. But nowadays, there's just so much content available. And I know for some folks, they may see that as a negative thing with regards to it just being so many tutorials on like the same concepts. But the reality is, we all don't necessarily grasp the information in the same way as we would watching like different types of tutorials. And that's why I personally started, because when I started doing tutorials, they all had a fashion focus to it as well. And so whenever folks would come across my tutorials, it was that aha moment, because I related it back to the whole fashion thing. So I think as people want to continue to create content, or people who are just starting out and want to create, when I'm asked, does it even make sense to create content just based on how much is available? I'm just like, yeah, because we all provide a different way to teach, and you never know how someone is going to be able to grasp what you teach in your way as opposed to whatever currently exists right now.
Yeah. Okay, so I want to do a bit of a topic change, because you work in spatial computing and you touched on this a little bit already. It's so interesting to me. And how did you actually get into this particular corner of the tech world?
Yeah, I was at an airport waiting for a flight, and I had saw a demo on Twitter for one of the Microsoft events that we were having. And I thought it was the coolest thing, because the speaker on the stage had on a HoloLens, and she was doing real-time speech translation. That was the part that I actually thought was cool, was the real-time speech translation, because she was speaking English. I believe the other individual on the other end was speaking Japanese. And so I said, oh my goodness, I want to do this. And I really liked it because I have a linguistics background in undergrad. So communication is my thing. And from there, I just asked the community literally on Twitter, what do I need to get started? And so many different people from the XR community chimed in with the resources. And then that's how I got in contact with the folks here at Microsoft for the mixed reality team. And I was very fortunate to get set up with a device. I also had gotten some help from the folks at Magic Leap as well. So reaching out to the community, asking for how to get started, and then having people to actually provide me the tools that were necessary to get started made a big difference. And that's how I ended up in advocacy within spatial computing, because I had spent, oh my goodness, 6 months just like trying to onboard to learn this technology, because I was very, very serious about it. And it all paid out in the end. But even like today, we're still learning. There's still new things that are coming out. I know like recently, for example, Microsoft Mesh was announced, and we're still learning that. And that's what I like about working in this area, is that no one can know everything. There's always something new coming out. And then when that new thing comes out, everyone has to go learn it. So there's like so much more opportunity, I would say, as opposed to just sticking with like a language, for example, because if you think like Python's not really going to change. I mean, as the versions come out, there might be some small differences here and there, but it's not this new emergent technology. And that's why I like being in this area. But learning overall, I would say it definitely took some time, but still learning today.
Yeah, well, and as the world is learning, and we're trying to make everything more equal access and improve things every single way, we benefit from having a more inclusive world. And I love seeing the work that you're doing in bringing people into it. And so many folks that we've talked to lately just are doing everything they can to bring this kind of technology to everyone and make it much more equitable. What are your thoughts on how technologists and leaders and just people in technology, how can we make changes in the right direction to continue pushing a more equitable, inclusive industry, world, everything?
Yeah, I would say from a technology perspective, we have to continue to come out with ways for folks to learn that are more approachable, I would say. So typically, like in the space that I'm in, it's more so making the onboarding process less than what it is. Providing low code, no code solutions as well make a really big difference, because not everyone wants to spend years learning, like in my case, C# to just create some 3D object floating around in the room. We should have ways to do things for folks who don't want to dive that deep into programming, but they want to create. And I think there's a lot of creative people out here, and I've been mentioning this a lot lately. There's a lot of untapped potential, but it's just that barrier to entry can be so high, and that's unfortunate. With regards to people and who are in the industry, I really think for the folks that are more privileged, it really helps when they're able to reach back and help the rest of us come forward, because just to be very blunt, in the society that we're in, for those who are going to be the more privileged, unfortunately, they have more say. And so their voice is going to carry more weight in a room of decision makers. And so as they're able to put themselves out there and help promote us as well, and making sure that, we're not all hiring people who look the same, that also makes a difference too. So from a tech perspective, making the process of learning and using platforms more approachable. And then from a human perspective, making sure that we have someone in the room to provide that voice to make sure that we are providing a much more inclusive and equitable industry, if you will.
Yeah, there was a mentor of mine, and she once told me the phrase "lift as you climb," and just as you are moving up in the world, bring people with you and help lift people up, so that way they can get to where you were as you move forward and continue to push everyone forward. And I think that it's a sentiment that everyone in tech needs to embrace more and more, because we are better together when everyone is making sure that people are successful.
Yeah, I can agree with that. And I think that's really, really important. And there's some internal things that I'm doing right now within my role to make sure that happens, not only for people who work currently internally, but even if you want to go back even a couple more years, for people who are still in college, making sure that they have the exposure to the different technologies that we have, so that way we can put them, more even level from a skill set perspective, to make sure that they're ready. But a lot of it comes down to resources. And so if the same resources aren't provided for folks who aren't necessarily like the 1% in tech, then it puts them at a very big disadvantage. So yeah, completely understand.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, I have one last question for you, and this is mostly out of curiosity. You do so much. Professionally, personally, the state of the world, everyone's working from home. You do so many cool things. How do you take care of yourself and prevent burnout and make sure that you aren't just burning the candle at both ends?
Yeah, every day I eat lunch at 12 o'clock for an hour. Lately, I've been binging Mary Tyler Moore, and that's been probably one of the best things I can do for myself. When it comes to working, I start my days at 9 a.m. I end my days at 5 p.m. Very seldom do I work outside of those hours. And when work is over, work is over. I refuse to pull all-nighters, and I've been like that since college. I just don't believe in them. And then when the weekend comes, fortunately, I'm in a position where I can actually have all these restrictions. But then when the weekend comes, I don't do anything work related. That's where I have even more fun, I would say. I can actually do all the different hobbies that I have. I can go out and enjoy myself. And I think putting your foot down with regards to the restrictions that you're setting for yourself makes a really big difference, because I seen this on Instagram recently, but it was like a tweet or a meme or something, and it had said something to the effect of, just because I'm free doesn't mean that I'm available, which is 100% true. That I think when folks assume that, oh, she says she's not doing anything right now, therefore she can do XYZ. No, that is not what that means. That means that this is time for myself, and I decide if I have the time. But unless you are vocal about that, or unless you put your foot down about that, people just assume, and they can take advantage of it. So I think it's very important to set those restrictions in place for yourself. And that's how I'm able to help manage my time.
I admire your ability to set those kinds of boundaries. That's something I've definitely struggled with, but I'm working on. But you're right, boundaries are life's mute button. And sometimes you just need to do that to keep your head on straight.
Yeah, makes a big difference. And then I know one thing that I spoke with some folks recently on is just the ability to say no. I have come to realize that it's not as easy for some people, whereas I'm like really great at saying no to stuff. But if you want to have a really good balance, and if you don't want to overwork yourself, that's one skill that I would highly suggest developing, is the ability to say no. And no is a full sentence as well. So as things come up, and if you know that you don't have the bandwidth for it, it's okay to say no. And I know that's a skill that some people need to build up the confidence to do, but it's okay.
Yeah, that is definitely one that I need to work on myself. Well, April, thank you so much for your time today. It was such a pleasure talking to you, and I hope you have a good one.
Thank you very much, Cassidy. I appreciate it.
All right, talk to you soon. Isn't April the coolest? I love the whole concept of spatial computing. It's just so fun to be able to talk to someone about that, about inclusion. Love it. Now let's go meet up with Jeremy again.
Well, Cassidy, what a day. I still can't believe we got to talk with so many great people. What were some of your favorite moments?
It's kind of hard to pick. I mean, again, I got to talk to LeVar Burton. Like, it's very, very hard to beat that. But it was also just kind of exciting to kind of humanize these really awesome tech people that I haven't gotten to speak with much before. And so being able to talk to John Papa about his favorite Disney movies, and being able to talk to April about her past in fashion, and even just talking to Mona Chalabi about how her art process is when she's coming up with a new piece. It was really, really cool just to meet these people and talk to them in a way that I haven't been able to before. How about you?
Absolutely. So I love talking with Scott about what us experienced folks can do to make things better for new folks. And then talking with Deborah about new folks and how they can empower themselves to launch. It was kind of a nice contrast. And then talking with Troy Hunt, is always fun, because it always makes me want to go back and check my passwords or check my routers or something.
Yeah, security people are a whole other breed, and it's fascinating and also terrifying sometimes, some of the things they're able to do and understand. It's really cool.
Yeah, exactly. And it's a skill to be able to turn that terrifying information into something that's fun to consume.
Yeah, and helpful to people too.
And I'm so jealous that you got to talk to LeVar Burton, who may be the future host of Jeopardy.
The fact, if I just talk to the future host of Jeopardy, highlight of the year.
Yeah, I'm definitely on that team. So great job, everyone. And I completed the coding challenge, and it was a lot of fun building UI elements and trying to remember CSS and things like that. still have a little over a week to access Pluralsight skills for free. You can visit the URL on the screen or find the link in the description below.
Well, you gotta love building new skills for free. And Jeremy, I think that's another Tech Skills Day in the books. Thank you so much, and thank you to all of you out there for helping us celebrate tech skills and building together. They're helping all of us build together.
Yes, absolutely.